Peter Whittle AM.
Thank you. May I welcome to the public gallery Year 12 politics students from the Oasis Academy Hadley, which is in Ponders End, journalism trainees from News Associates, and officers from the TfL Local and Community Partnerships Unit. Can I also provide an update on some recent Assembly activity? The Assembly's campaign for a domestic abusers register took on a human face as a brave young woman who lost an eye through domestic abuse discussed the needs for a register in various media outlets. We would like to put our thanks to Akaredi on record. We also commemorated the one-year anniversary of the dreadful Grenfell Tower fire. A video showing how the local community spirit is stronger than ever in the aftermath of the terrible tragedy is showing on our website. Looking ahead, next Monday the Transport Committee will question the Chief Operating Officer of Govia Thameslink Railway about the new timetable across all of its services and the severe disruption which it has caused. We remembered the people of Finsbury Park this week on the anniversary of the appalling attack there. It was yet another attempt to breed hatred and division in our city. But Londoners cherish the tolerance and diversity of the capital, and we remain united in our condemnation of all acts of terror. I should like to pay tribute to Mayor Garside, who recently passed away. Mayor was elected to the London County Council for Woolwich West at the age of 26 and was the youngest woman ever to serve on the council. She served a total of 54 years, first representing Greenwich on the LCC, followed by the GLC and the Inner London Education Authority. Finally, on behalf of the Assembly, I would like to congratulate Sir Mark Rowley, Queen's Police Medal, former Assistant Commissioner, who received a knighthood for services to policing in Her Majesty the Queen's Birthday Honours List. Congratulations also to Ms Victoria Harrison-Cook, Head of Media at Transport for London, who received an MBE for services to diversity in public relations. I'm sure the Assembly will join me in placing on record our congratulations to all Londoners who were also recipients of honours. Declarations of interest. Can I please ask the Assembly to note the recommendation set out in item 2? Thank you very much. Can I ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests or other relevant interests where they relate to items on the agenda for today's meetings? Right, thank you very much. May I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on the 21st of May 2018 as an accurate record? Thank you. May I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 4th of May 2018 to the 7th of June 2018? Thank you. The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. We've had a request for a matter for inclusion within the Mayor's oral report, which is from David Curtin, who wants an update on why the Metropolitan Police Service decided to close down the Lewisham East by-election hustings on the evening of Tuesday, the 12th of June 2018. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning. Since we last met, we've marked the anniversaries of both the London Bridge and the Finsbury Park terrorist attacks. A year on, it's no less difficult, no less painful. We send our best wishes, love and prayers to the victims' families and everyone who was injured. As well as remembering those we lost last year, I know the whole Assembly will join me in paying tribute once again to the heroic efforts of our emergency services, transport colleagues and ordinary Londoners who bravely ran towards danger while directing others towards safety. The cowardly terrorists who commit these horrific acts do so to try and divide us, to fuel fear and to change how we treat one another. I'm proud of the way we've responded as a city, standing united in defiance and staying true to our values and our way of life. Last year was an incredibly tough time for our city, and I know that as we mark these sad anniversaries and as we honour the innocent victims, we recommit as Londoners to honouring them through our actions and standing united against terrorism. We also, as you said, recently marked the anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. I've met survivors, residents and the local community on many occasions over the last year. The grief felt by the local community and by people across our city is still raw. And I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say we send our prayers and best wishes once again to the families and friends who lost loved ones. Alongside the heartache, the Grenfell fire has shone a light on the stark inequalities that still exist in our city. A year on, we must be more determined than ever to ensure justice is done, but also to implement the changes we need to create a fairer, more equal society, one that works for everyone. Since we last met, Chair, I've also been working on a number of other strategies and initiatives to improve the lives of Londoners. Crucially, this includes continuing to do everything possible to tackle violent crime in our city, not only by working with the police to crack down on the problem, but by working to tackle the complex root causes of violent crime. I've also continued to lobby the government for the extra resources we need to help keep our city as safe as possible, as our police service is still overstretched and under-resourced as a consequence of government cuts. I look forward to answering further questions during the course of today, but I have, as you said, been asked to give an oral update on a question asked by Assembly Member Curtin. I would start by congratulating Janet Davey, the newly elected Member of Parliament for Lewisham East, on her emphatic victory. As with all London MPs, I look forward to working with her on the key challenges facing our city and creating more opportunities for Londoners to fulfil their potential. I know Janet will make a tremendous MP, following in the footsteps of her illustrious predecessor, Heidi Alexander, who we're now lucky to have as London's Deputy Mayor for Transport. My understanding is this specific incident, a hustings, occurred during a pre-planned event that the Met was aware of and for which they had a policing plan in place. On the evening, around 100 of the group For Britain supporters attended the event, and a crowd of 100 to 150 anti-fascist protesters also gathered outside. This caused the Met Police concerns for public safety. Police officers liaised with the organiser, and the event was closed with his permission after he and the candidate for Britain Movement Party were informed that the police could no longer guarantee public safety. This was an operational decision taken by the police in conjunction with the organiser.
Something to what you said there. There was not 100 people from the For Britain movement in the hustings. In fact, there was hardly anyone there. The candidate herself didn't turn up, but I was there. I was intimidated and harassed myself, as were almost all of the candidates and voters going into the meeting who wanted to listen to the candidate speaking. There was a mob outside which was acting with absolute thuggery, something I've never seen in this country before. On your watch, in London, a hustings, part of the democratic process for a by-election, was shut down. And it wasn't the mob that was dispersed by the police, it was the candidates and the voters inside. And everyone going into that meeting was harassed. Why did the police not protect the democratic process and disperse the mob, the far-left protesters outside, rather than instead of dispersing the crowd, dispersing the people inside the hustings?
Well, Chair, I can't but repeat the words that I said previously. The police were concerned about public safety. The police are well aware of our commitment to freedom of expression, and the police acted on the expert views they had. I appreciate members of the Assembly, particularly UKIP candidates, claim to be experts on everything, including policing matters. I don't. I rely upon the advice given to me by those in charge of operational matters, and I rely upon their advice that the safe thing to do was, after consulting the organisers and the candidates, to counsel the hustings. I suspect, Chair, had, God forbid, hustings taken place and there had been a public order incident and people injured, I'd be accused of causing those injuries as well. But hey-ho, that's politics in the Assembly in 2018.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I don't appreciate the sarcasm in your answer, but what I do want is the democratic process in this country to remain free. You talk about freedom of speech. The freedom for people to listen to candidates and for candidates to speak, whatever you think of their views, is sacrosanct in this country. The police should not have allowed that hustings to be stopped. Why did that happen?
I can repeat the answer, Chair, if you want me to.
I think that Assemblymember Curtin has made his point on this one. Are there any other questions on the Mayor's oral report? Thank you very much. Well, we now go to question time, where unusually the first question is my own, but this is a non-political question and relates to Assembly policy. Heathrow expansion.
Thank you, Chair. The south east of England is in need of additional airport capacity, but I believe the government is pressing ahead with the wrong decision to build a new runway at Heathrow. I stood for election in 2016 on a manifesto opposed to a third runway at Heathrow. While I believe in a better Heathrow, I do not believe a bigger Heathrow is the right answer for London, and I remain committed to opposing such a short-sighted decision. There are no plans on how to deal with the valid concerns about Heathrow expansion. In particular, the impacts on public health from noise and air quality pollution are simply not being taken seriously enough. Hundreds of thousands of Londoners will suffer from additional air and noise pollution caused by a third runway at Heathrow. Nor do the government have any plans for how it will fund the billions of pounds needed to improve road and rail connections to the airport and prevent huge congestion across the transport network. Government hasn't accepted the comprehensive recommendations of the Transport Select Committee either. And this is critically important. There is a better option. A second runway at Gatwick is a better option, requiring much less additional transport investment and providing Britain with all the economic benefits of expansion while keeping our air quality safe and within legal limits. It can also be delivered more quickly and with a fraction of the environmental impacts. Since I became Mayor, TfL has been providing technical support to the 4 boroughs, Windsor and Maidenhead, Hillingdon, Richmond and Wandsworth, in their legal challenges against the third runway. So far, £320,000 has been spent in providing this support. In addition, I've regularly made known my opposition to a third runway through formal consultations and correspondence to the Secretary of State. The next key development is on Monday, when Parliament is due to vote on the government's final national policy statement on Heathrow expansion. I will ensure briefings are provided to MPs to inform the debate and vote. Chair, I would like to inform the Assembly today that if the vote on Monday in Parliament goes in favour of a third runway, then it is my intention to join the legal action being brought by the local authorities. This will be a critical moment, and for the sake of Londoners affected, not least by poor air quality, disruption from noise, and the costs needed to improve transport connections, I will do what I can to stop these plans.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that. I can't tell you how pleased the people will be in the boroughs that I represent. You will know, of course, that in the last week, the London Borough of Hammersmith has also said that it will join the action against the government, and there can be no doubt that with the GLA standing shoulder to shoulder with the boroughs, that ought to give the government reason to think again on the matter. I'd like to explore, if I may please, other ways in which we can thwart this unwise policy in asking you about actions which TfL can make. TfL have said that the cost of improving transport for this is land transport for an expanded Heathrow will be 20 billion. This is something which will benefit a private organisation. Can you tell us today that TfL will not pay a penny towards any of these costs?
Do you mean, sorry, Chair, to be clear, do you mean the public transport improvements required for Heathrow runway 32?
That is right.
So, Chair, what we're going to do is, you'll be aware there's a period of a few weeks after the vote on Monday, assuming the worst happens and Parliament decides to vote for runway 3. And during the course of those, I think it's 6 weeks, Chair, we'll be considering all options. And you're right to remind the Assembly that the reason why it's important, when you mentioned Hammersmith and Fulham, is this confirms this is cross-party. This confirms this is not tribal party politics. There is a council outside of London. And I think, bearing in mind, all of us who stood in the 2016 mayoral elections, I think all the main candidates stood on a platform against runway 3. In the preceding few weeks and months, we've done everything we can short of joining the legal action. But I take on board your suggestion. You'd appreciate, what I wouldn't want to do is telegraph the intentions of the GLA, but I hear what you say. And we will do what we can to make sure that the views of the Assembly, which are unanimous, I understand, myself and those we represent are taken on board when it comes to how public monies are spent, bearing in mind the huge concerns that have been expressed by myself and others over the course of the past about the cost of this new runway.
I understand what you're saying about not wanting to reveal our hand, but I would have suggested to you, Mr. Mayor, that having your muscle and the muscle of the GLA and all its resources, including those of TfL, if we were to signal today in advance to Parliament that we will be doing all that we possibly can to thwart this unwise proposal, by doing so today, that might in itself influence the decision of members of Parliament, many of whom I understand, particularly from the opposition, will be unwhipped on this matter.
Well, Chair, can I just repeat, I will do what I can to stop these plans.
You will know, Mr. Mayor, that the Assembly at its last meeting, in addition to asking you to do all that you can on it, the Assembly itself said that they would seek to do all that they could to stop this materialising. I wonder, Mr. Mayor, as this matter goes through the Assembly committees, and clearly this is going to be ways, for example, in which it can give flesh to your environment strategy in relation to pollution, you will accelerate consideration of any such committee report so that you may endorse them. I have no doubt that, for example, that the Environment Committee is likely to say that they do not want to see thousands of children asphyxiated and deafened by the fruition of these proposals. Often what happens is when we have reports which are given to you for your approval, there isn't, and I appreciate that you're busy, instant approval for them. Can we be sure that you will support each of the Assembly's committees in seeking to thwart the proposal?
You make a very good point, Chair. We need to expedite my response to your report, particularly during the time period where we're discussing Runway 3. Can I take that away and make sure that I am far quicker? Because obviously the force of the Assembly and the Mayor is far more effective than just the Assembly. So let me take that away and undertake to endeavour to meet your challenge to me.
Well, thank you. My constituents, and I'm sure most Londoners, will be grateful for this. Are there any other members? Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, your predecessor, who you always like to show that you go one better than, he committed to lie down in front of the bulldozers if this goes ahead. Will you commit to do the same, Mr.
Well,
Mayor?
Actually going on holiday.
Let's see where he is on Monday, shall we? So let's Chair, I'm not usually a betting man, but I bet the politician that Keith aspires to be and I, only one of us will be in London on Monday, and it won't be, we'll see who it is on Monday. But I see this, far more effective than lying down in front of a bulldozer is being in Parliament to vote against these plans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more on this one? Right, the second question on the agenda is from Assembly Member Dismore, and it relates to police funding.
Thank you for your question. In view of the needs of the Met Police being made abundantly clear to the current Home Secretary and the previous Home Secretary, I would hope everyone in government has heard the pleas for more resources being made from this chamber and right across London. And by the way, it's also been made by communities across our country. I met with the new Home Secretary at the Serious Violent Task Force last week and told him of the urgent need for an increase in police funding both nationally and in London. I do welcome his warm words about his commitment to prioritise police funding in the spending review next year, when he recently told the Police Federation Conference that he wants policing to have the, and I quote, resources that they need. It's good to hear a Cabinet Minister echo what we've all been saying for some time now about the consequences of the cuts to police funding, which have left our officers, in his words, feeling, and I quote, stretched, overburdened, and not sufficiently rewarded. And the facts are clear. Central government funding for the Met has been cut by more than £700 million since 2010, and officer numbers have now fallen below 30,000 for the first time since 2003. And the government still requires the Met to make a further £325 million savings by 2021. At the same time, the demands faced by the Met are increasing in volume and complexity, so it should be no surprise to ministers this is having an impact, with violent crime up by 21% over the past year across England and Wales, and in London by over 4%. Waiting until the spending review next year to tackle this is far too late. I've done what I can in the meantime by providing more than £138 million for the Met service over the last 2 years. This year, £110 million includes additional funds to pay for 1,000 more officers than would otherwise be the case. But this is paid for by the residents and businesses of London through council tax and business rates. As a consequence, the GLA now provides nearly a quarter of all Met funding compared to less than 20% in 2010. As I said to the Home Secretary in person, we need him to deliver on his words and secure additional government funding for the police in the government's budget this autumn.
Thank you for that. And the Home Secretary's words are a welcome change from his predecessor, Theresa May, who told the Police Federation to stop crying wolf over police cuts. And you welcome the one words, but we need more than one words, don't we? How much additional funding do you think the Home Secretary should guarantee for the Met? As you say, we can't wait till next year's spending review. But this morning's reports anticipating the Chancellor's speech tonight suggest that the Chancellor will say there's no more money for the police. How do you respond to that?
Well, I find it astonishing if the Chancellor's response to the new Home Secretary is no new money for the police. What we need from the government is to reverse the cuts they've already made, is to fully fund the national and international capital cities grant. We only get, roughly speaking, half of that money, and to provide real-term increases so we can invest in officers, equipment, and the other infrastructure that they need. And I'll make this point. The police have made huge efficiency savings over the last 5, 6, 7 years. It's unfair to suggest they've not made the efficiency savings required upon them, but now there's no more to cut. We simply cannot cut anymore, and that's why it's incumbent upon the new Home Secretary to deliver on his understanding of the needs of our police service and get us more resources urgently.
Well, the government's also announced they'll be looking at the police funding formula in the 2019 spending review. And when the government last looked at changing this, the Met stood to lose additionally between 174 million and 700 million a year. And this year we saw the government smoke and mirrors pretending that the police settlement, they were going to give millions more, but in fact it wasn't a penny more, and all they did was allow you to raise more. How can we be sure the same won't happen this time round in next year's spending review?
Well, you're right to remind the Assembly, the problems we had last time was a combination of the cuts from the CSR, the cuts in real terms made by the government's consequence of austerity, but also the potential of further cuts because of a police funding formula review change. They delayed the funding formula review change, which we welcome. The good news is that it appears the Home Office are willing to engage with the Met Police Service in relation to what the new formula should be. We will be part of any Home Office user group and making the point that it's really important the government realises the unique needs of London, not simply because of our increasing population, the complexity of crime, but we have, in addition to our population of 9 million, 1.5 million additional people in London because of tourists, because of commuters, which the government's formally needs to recognise.
Thank you. Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Berry and relates to the use of borough-wide Section 60.
Thank you, Chair. It's important to place this issue in context. We have seen since 2014 an increase in violent crime across England and Wales, including London, and this includes teenagers dying on streets from gun and knife violence. My knife crime strategy is delivering a public health approach to reducing violence. This includes backing the police in conducting additional enforcement activity and targeted intelligence-led stop and search. The use of Section 60 orders is an important tool to be deployed in strictly limited circumstances, where a senior officer reasonably believes that incidents involving serious violence may take place in any locality in the police area, and to prevent serious violence and enable the recovery of offensive weapons. Authorisation is required from a commander or above, and a superintendent then manages it on an hourly basis. This is a high level of authorisation. We've had the biggest rollout of body-worn videos of any city in the world since I became mayor. Body-worn videos are worn for accountability and transparency, as well as to give the police more confidence. The use of Section 60 powers, their application, whether borough-wide or otherwise, is an operational decision for our police service. These powers enable police officers to conduct stop and search in a defined geographical area, which might be borough-wide if there's an immediate concern of serious violence or the widespread carrying of weapons. This is often used immediately after a violent incident to prevent more violence occurring. During the course of 2017 and 18, 106 Section 60 authorisations were issued. We've seen this increase significantly recently, with 95 issued across London from January to April this year. My Deputy Mayor and I now receive regular updates on the use of Section 60, including where they're implemented across whole boroughs as part of our fortnightly discussions on knife crime and violence with the Commissioner. I've seen her later on today as well. Of the 95 authorisations issued between January and April this year, 46 covered whole borough areas. Section 60 stop and searches accounted for 2.5% of stop and searches in the same period. This wider increase in the use of Section 60 comes at a time when the Commissioner and I have been clear that Londoners can expect to see an increase in the use of targeted, intelligence-led stop and search, and this includes the use of body-worn cameras by officers during stop and search. We know that these can reduce complaints.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been trying to find out more about this issue. Unfortunately, I have 2 written questions that I submitted to the Mayor's Question Time to try and get some data on the use of borough-wide stop and search orders going back in time. Haven't been answered yet, and I wondered if you might be able to speed that up a bit. I mean, I've actually, thank you for telling us there have been 46 borough-wide stop and search, Section 60 orders so far this year. I've been trying to track those by looking at the Twitter feeds of the police, and I don't think I've captured all of those that way. So,
Chair, why don't I agree to, I know it was raised at the last Police and Crime Committee, I'm looking towards the Chair now, but why don't we agree for me to arrange for the Deputy Mayor and the relevant officer to come to the Police and Crime Committee. Other members can go along to that committee and there can be a proper explanation of this issue, because it's really important that Assembly members have confidence in what the police are doing. The police want you to have confidence in what they're doing.
I'm sure we would welcome that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously I don't have much time here today, and in Police and Crime already, other Assembly members who cover constituencies are concerned that potentially the borough-wideness of this doesn't mean that it's necessarily targeted and intelligence-led. We worry that it's being used as a reassurance tool rather than for tactical reasons, and we want a very close eye kept on this. Can you reassure us that you're keeping a very close eye on this?
Well, firstly, can I say I understand the articulation of your concerns. I think they're reasonable concerns to be articulated. Can I reassure you that those are concerns that others have as well, and it's important that I am reassured the police are doing what they can. I've seen myself the use of Section 60 post an incident. Can I give you a real example? So, stabbing occurs. We're worried about reprisals. The police know tensions are high, and we know it's limited to a geographical area. So in those circumstances, the senior officer on the ground will ask for authorisation, and he or she knows the area better, and that's led to a de-escalation. What the police are also keen to do is make sure there are civilians present during the high-profile stop and searches, where the violent crime task force is out and stuff. So the Deputy Mayor and I are making sure we have more checks and balances, and that's why I'm keen for you at the Police and Crime Committee to see some of the things we're doing. And I'm open to ideas, by the way, Chair, about more scrutiny. The other good news is the stop and search monitoring groups are having more scrutiny as well, but it's important we get this really important tool.
Just finally on the issue of communication, I'm a ward councillor, and we had a borough-wide Section 60 across Camden, where I wasn't informed about this until several days later, and it had gone on for a couple of days. That's just to give us an example. I think we are seeing maybe not the communication there should be. Like I say, I haven't found all 46 on Twitter, and I think that's an important way for police to let people know. Because I think if we're going to have people covered by these quite draconian powers, it's important that the communication is good. So hopefully you can do something to improve the communication as well.
I don't think it's reasonable to expect the police on operational matters to let 2,000 councillors, 73 MPs, 32 council leaders, 25 assembly members, the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and others to know every time there's a Section 60.
No. I'm just that when it is covering a ward, then the ward is. This is the expansion of it. But we can.
But Chair, I mean, it's worth this. This is really important for politics. Often these are taking place at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yes, that will do.
I just think we've got to be reasonable about operational decisions taken by senior officers, and I've explained in my answer the authority required, the hourly checks, and often these are instant decisions. And so the police are doing what they can using social media, letting key stakeholders know. I think it is unreasonable to expect the police to let every ward councillor across London know when there's a Section 60, and I'm not sure that's what's been suggested.
No. I mean, we're out of time, I'm afraid. But hopefully your promise to discuss this at PCC
there we are. You've answered
will
your own
off.
question.
Sorry,
next question on the agenda is in the name of Assembly Member Whittle, but will be asked by Assembly Member Curtin and relates to hate crime.
Thank you, Chair. The article that's referred to alleges that police are wasting time dealing with hate incidents. I haven't seen any evidence of this. It will always be possible to point to examples which superficially might look unusual, but it's important to focus on the thousands of incidents the police respond to where Londoners' lives are negatively affected. Hate crimes are potentially heinous crimes and must be investigated properly. A National Police Chiefs Council spokesman has said, by recording and reviewing reports of hate incidents, police forces play a vital role in helping prevent hate crime. Officers can often use these reports as an indication of where and when tensions could escalate into violence. The evidence is clear that hate crime can not only cause lasting physical and psychological damage, but often impact the whole community too, creating a climate of fear and intimidation. In 2017 and 18 alone, the public reported over 19,000 hate crime offences and nearly 18,000 hate incidents to the Met Police. I'm sure Assembly members will agree that we must do everything we can to tackle hate crime across our city, and not just to dismiss it as a trivial issue. The police have a vital role to play, but of course they won't be able to solve this problem alone. We need everyone in society to stand up and challenge hatred and prejudice.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question actually asks you, how many hours has the Metropolitan Police spent investigating such incidents? And it would be good to get an answer from you specifically on that. But talking about hate incidents, we have in the report here, which you were alluding to, an incident of someone reporting a barking dog, a student being refused drinks in a bar, a bus driver who was reported to be giving a racist look, whatever that is. In figures I've asked for you, which you've given me on hate crimes, not hate incidents, we've got one incident of Islamophobic possession of drugs, 7 incidents of homophobic shoplifting. I think people seeing this kind of thing being reported to the police would, and the police spending time on this would think, well, what on earth are the police doing when they're not, we've got surging knife crime, surging murder, surging level of rape in London. Why are police spending their time on hate incidents, which are very, very trivial, rather than investigating these more serious crimes and then trying to bring down the level of knife crime in London? So can you go back and tell me, how many hours has the Metropolitan Police spent investigating such trivial incidents?
Well, I'm surprised, Chair, some members are not aware that the police don't time record time spent on each offence that they investigate. And if they did, you'd criticise them for spending time logging the time they spend investigating every single crime. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure why you want to criticise the police for members of the public making complaints to them. I mean, the police respond to the complaints made. They will then have a triage process and decide which complaints spend more time investigating and which complaints spend less time investigating. And you'll be aware, because you've criticised in the past, the thresholds the police have in relation to investigating various offences. Once the police think there's a potential of a charge having occurred, they then refer to the CPS, and they have their own guidance in relation to whether a prosecution should be brought. And there's basically 2 tests they have. One is if it's in the public interest to bring a prosecution. 2 is whether it's got a reasonable chance of success in a prosecution being brought, bearing in mind the burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. And so I'm not sure why you're trivialising issues around hate crime, because I think it's a really important issue in a diverse city as ours, and I want the police to have a zero tolerance towards hate crime. And we saw, as a consequence, partly I think because of some of the campaigning that took place before the referendum, a massive spike in hate crimes across our city.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I mean, this is a narrative which you've been talking about, Brexit and so on. I mean,
Chair,
let's not go into that. But
I was answering the question, Chair, but
well, you've been giving
one of the great
very
British
long
things,
answer.
Chair, is manners, and I'm surprised the UK member doesn't realise the British thing of manners.
I'm going to move on to the next thing. I mean, you can't, talking about these imaginary hate crime spikes that you do. But there's something very disturbing that appeared on the website of the Metropolitan Police back in March, which was very, very quickly removed. And there was a paragraph that says, if someone does something that isn't a criminal offence, but the victim or anyone else believes it was motivated by prejudice or hate, we would class that as a hate incident. Though what the perpetrator has done may not be against the law, their reasons for doing it are. This means that it may be possible to charge them with an offence. Now, whoever wrote that paragraph seems to be adhering to a culture where you're looking to criminalise people for things that aren't criminal offences. Now, this paragraph was roundly condemned and ridiculed, and then it was very, very quickly removed. But why would something like that appear on the website of the Metropolitan Police? And how far up the chain does this attitude and this culture go?
So, just so we're clear, I'm personally responsible for a hustings being cancelled, and now I'm personally responsible for a paragraph on a website 6 months ago.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I just asked you how far up it was. I didn't say that you were personally responsible. I'm asking you where this kind of culture and attitude comes from.
I'm not sure.
You sound a little bit defensive, so maybe you are responsible.
With you, never. I've got no idea what paragraph it's been referred to, Chair. I'm happy to go away and look into the paragraph that's been referred to that's causing so much consternation to the Assembly member.
Any more on this?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Boff and relates to housing delivery.
Thank you, Chair. Building more affordable homes for Londoners is a top priority. I'm pleased we've secured £4.82 billion from government to start 116,000 genuinely affordable homes by 2022. There are a number of ways to record the progress in delivering social and affordable housing stock in London. But the 116,000 target is the basis of our funding deal with government, and so it's important to record progress toward it that the government are happy with. I'm pleased, therefore, that last year 12,526 affordable homes funded by City Hall were started. This number exceeded the target for 2017 and 18 we had agreed with the government, and was the highest number of affordable homes, was the highest number of affordable housing starts in any year since funding was devolved to City Hall. Crucially, it included 2,826 homes based on social rent levels, more than in the previous 4 years combined, and up from the pipeline I inherited from the last mayor that remarkably included 0 homes for social rent. Recording affordable housing starts in this way uses definitions and targets agreed with the government, and so progress has to be recorded on that basis. National practice requires the reporting cycle to be in twice yearly, but in response to a reasonable request of Assembly Member Bacon at the previous Mayor's question time, I'm pleased to be able to confirm I'll be doubling the frequency of reporting. The number of starts will be published on the london.gov.uk website on a quarterly basis, 6 weeks in arrears, and I've also asked that progress towards the 116,000 target be reported to the Assembly Budget Monitoring Subcommittee as well. The recording of starts is being reported using a methodology that has remained consistent since responsibility for funding affordable housing was devolved to the GLA in 2012. I'm told the methodology is also consistent with that used by DCLG and now MHCLG for its official national statistics. This consistency is crucially important because MHCLG produced their national stats by combining the GLA figures for London with those reported by Homes England for the rest of the country. Any inconsistencies in methodology between GLA and MCHLG would therefore risk undermining the production of robust national statistics. I've always been clear that our targets will be challenging, requiring everyone involved, including government, to work together, but I'm pleased we're making progress towards our goals.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. From that statement, is it fair to say that you are confident in the accuracy of your affordable housing figures?
Yes.
You may be familiar with the concerns raised recently by Richard Tice regarding the affordable housing figures. Can you please explain how 241 affordable housing starts at Royal Wharf Phase 3 in Newham and 253 affordable housing starts at Mill Harbour Plaza in Tower Hamlets appeared as starts in both the March 2017 and March 2018 figures?
I've seen these misleading claims by the co-founder of Leave UK and one of your rivals to run for Tory candidate to be mayor in 2020. I think the allegation from Mr. Tice is that these were claimed in a previous year and claimed again in the last year. My understanding is all homes we have grant funded have had their starts recorded in line with the agreed and published definition of a start. This definition is recognised by government. In relation to the particular points about previous years having starts and then recorded in this year, I'm afraid that's a criticism that should be made of the previous mayor's programme and these homes being at risk. My understanding is, in the 2 cases you've highlighted, affordable homes from the previous mayor's programme were at risk, which means they had been so badly delayed they were likely to miss their final deadlines for completion altogether. To fix this mess and make sure these affordable homes became available to Londoners who need them, they were removed from the previous programme and restarted under a new agreement within the current programme.
Mr. Mayor, I could understand that if these were starts under the previous mayor's watch, but these were starts that you reported in March last year and reported again this year.
No.
How can you start a scheme twice?
No, they were, let me repeat, they're the previous mayor's programme.
I have them in front of me, the March
So do I.
2017 figures. You feature Royal Wharf and you feature Mill Harbour Plaza. The numbers are the same. In one case 253, in the other 241. And they are in both last year and this year. How can you explain that?
I just have, my programme was after that date. These are the previous mayor's programme that Mr Tice has recorded, that, as alleged, were recorded incorrectly in 2 years.
So you're saying that they did not start previously and it wasn't your authority where they were unstarted?
I'm confirming they were part of the previous mayor's programme. They were at risk. They were so badly delayed they were likely to miss their final deadlines for completion altogether.
But they were
which is why they were
reported as
removed.
started, Mr. Mayor.
And they were removed because they were so badly delayed.
So you removed them and then started them again?
The housing team removed those schemes under the previous mayor's programme that was so badly delayed, and they tried to fix the mess. So there's no double counting because they've been removed.
But it's a start, Mr. Mayor. It means the scheme has started, not delayed. It could be delayed in implementation, but it was a start which you've double counted. You counted a start that was in March 2017 as one that's in 2018. I'm just going on your figures, Mr. Mayor.
And I've explained it was removed because the previous mayor's programme was at risk of being badly delayed.
You removed it and then put it back on?
No, it's been removed because it's so badly delayed, and the additional funds required for the starts were put in 17-18. It's quite straightforward. I'm not sure what... I can see the sniggering, that's pre-rehearsed, I get that, but I don't understand your confusion.
The confusion is, Mr. Mayor, is I do not understand how you can report a scheme as started and then remove it. And then bring it up again.
Right, well, let me try again. Because they're at risk of failing, and so if no action is taken, they will fail. Nobody wants so I'm getting hectored from there. Which one should I answer, Chair?
Yes, do go on.
Okay.
I may say I'm having difficulty in understanding the difference between a programme and a start.
Well, let me try my best. Well, let me define, to help you, Chair, let me define what start is.
Please.
So, starts on a site are recorded when providers log a scheme with the GLA, which may be sometime after the actual start. Providers receiving affordable housing grant funding also have to comply with the definition of a start from GLA funding agreement.
Mr. Mayor, the definition of start has not changed. I'm not questioning the definition of a start.
The Chair was.
He's explaining the difference between what is in a programme
you can chair or he can.
And what is a start.
I'm not asking about the definition of a start.
Sorry,
All
Chair,
I'm saying, with that standard definition, how can it happen twice? How can you count the same thing twice?
Right.
I don't think we're going to get an answer which will satisfy Assembly
Perhaps, Mr. Mayor, you could write to me with that reply, because it may probably make more sense written down than what you're saying, because these were two sets of starts. And, Mr. Mayor, don't you think you've been caught cooking the books?
No, I don't. And coming from somebody who's an aider and abettor of the co-founder of Leave.uk, a bit rich coming from you, mate.
So you don't think that those at least 400 properties that you've double counted, don't you think that actually means, and the reason you're embarrassed, Mr. Mayor, is that you didn't hit 12,520 starts. You actually hit considerably less than that, and that you have failed on the very low benchmark of achievement for providing those homes that Londoners want to see. Don't you think you're actually covering up your failure, Mr. Mayor?
Chair, can I thank the Senate member for the opportunity to explain what we've achieved in 2017-2018. We have managed to start 12,526 affordable homes. We've ditched the dodgy definition of what an affordable home is. That's the largest number of starts since the Mayor was devolved these powers. Assembly Member Bacon is also a rival to Mr. Boff to be a mayoral candidate. He's hectoring me. What he's got to realise,
don't argue amongst yourselves. You
what
can
he's got to
argue
realise,
with the Mayor.
well, Chair, that's the
but
Tory
not
party all over.
amongst yourselves.
That's the Tory party all over, Chair. Happens in Parliament, happens in Cabinet, happens here. But the point is this: we had a zero pipeline of social rent homes, and we managed to start more than 2,800 of social rent homes. And by the way, that's more than the previous 4 years combined. Now, I can appreciate if you're aspiring to be the Tory candidate to run for Mayor in 2020, you're worried. Because here you have a Labour politician building the homes Londoners need, and it makes you really embarrassed because the guy you supported for 8 years couldn't achieve that. And I can understand why they rely on these dodgy, misleading claims from the co-founder of Leave UK to try and smear these figures.
Not to
But it
talk about
casting
your
aspersions
failure in
on officers in the
housing.
GLA
But we're
who work
going to make
incredibly
you.
hard.
Would you gentlemen try to speak in ordinary conversational tones?
You know, Mr. Mayor, I've spent all my time talking about housing. You've decided to talk about something else. Is it because you're embarrassed about your housing record and that you've been caught cooking the books?
Let me explain again in plain English that you understand. I'm incredibly proud of our record over the last 2 years in fixing the housing crisis left behind by Boris Johnson. I would suggest anybody suggesting to run to be the Tory candidate for Mayor should be ashamed of the Tory record between 2008 and 2016. And anybody who aspires to be a Tory candidate for the Mayor in 2020 should realise we need more support from this government. Notwithstanding the lack of support from this government, we've had record starts in 17-18 for social rent. Somebody else hectoring me as well. Which one is the candidate? I'm not sure. Is it Devonish? Is it Boff? Is it Bacon? Is it Tice?
Let's talk housing, Mr. Mayor. Let's concentrate. You know, I'm here. See here.
Which one, Chair? Which one? Which one should I deal with?
Over here. I'm asking the question. Over here.
Do have a go at answering the questions. Manifestly, you're not going to admit to being in the wrong. Yes. Let's accept that. Or anybody.
Even though demonstrably you are, Mr. Mayor. One final question that I will ask, because we're not getting very far with this, is: will you ensure that the future releases of GLA housing figures include a breakdown of schemes that these relate to? Because at the moment, these have to be FOI'd, which is ridiculous when you're trying to judge the authenticity of these cooked-up figures.
Right. Assembly Member Devonish.
Will you commit to that, Mr. Mayor, that you will publish the schemes?
There are at least 3 premises in the question I disagree with, so I can't agree to a question with a false premise.
Of schemes in future that have been started?
So if you were drawing the cooked-up figures and stuff, I'm clear what you're suggesting.
Will you ensure that the future releases of GLA housing figures include a breakdown of schemes that these relate to?
I will ensure that we abide by the guidance given by national government. If you're suggesting national government is cooking the figures,
you're going to keep them secret.
If you're suggesting national government's cooking the figures, then it's an issue to raise with your bosses.
So, Mr. Mayor, are you committing yourself to keeping those figures secret?
I'm commissioned to abiding by the guidance given by national government, and if
so you will not release the breakdown of schemes in the future.
Let's be clear, Chair. It appears that the Conservative Party in the Assembly is accusing national government of cooking the books. That's an issue. That's an issue they want to raise with national government. That's an issue for them.
So you won't include a breakdown of schemes along with your housing figures in future. That's interesting to know, bearing in mind our commitment in the GLA to transparency.
Let me try and deal with this hustings from the pitch from the Assembly member. It's good practice for him. So I have to abide by the guidance given to me by the department. Notwithstanding that, and they only require us to report twice a year, I'll be reporting.
I'm not asking for what they're doing, Mr. Mayor. I'm asking whether or not you will publish that information. will you publish it? You are not mandated to not publish information.
Notwithstanding the guidance from national government to only publish twice a year, I will double that and report quarterly. Additionally, I'll be reporting to the relevant committee as well. I'll, of course, always try and provide as much information as I can. What I will not suggest is an allegation, a very serious allegation made by an Assembly member against officers in this GLA that they're cooking the books. If it's suggestive...
I'm not
if it's suggestive...
At no point did I say that, Mr Mayor.
I didn't hear anybody mention the officers of the GLA.
Who produces the figures, Chair? Who produces the figures, Chair?
So are you blaming the officers for this, Mr Mayor? Are you blaming your officers? Are you throwing them under the bus, Mr Mayor? How big of you?
Example of why I can't wait for the election campaign to begin, so Londoners can see the sort of smears these lot will throw and do anything to try and win a vote.
You've just smeared the
I
officers.
Can't wait.
I don't think we're going to make any further progress, and I look forward to another, 20 months of this. Right. Assembly Member Devonish.
Mr Mayor, would you agree to an independent review of how site starts are calculated, please?
I've already answered the question in relation to my confidence in the figures given to me by the officers, and I don't think an independent review is required. But no doubt, if a multimillionaire who wants to be a Tory candidate for mayor wants to do some misleading figures and get them published, they'll do so.
They went to your own site.
Are you concerned that several major London home builders are leaving the London market?
Absolutely. That's why it's really important the government gets to grip with Brexit. I'm really concerned about the consequences of the way the government's negotiating Brexit, the lack of confidence it leads to businesses in our city, uncertainty it creates to investors coming to our city. I'm concerned about the construction sector, the fact that a considerable number of the construction sector are EU citizens who are concerned about their future. That leads to a problem in relation to the abilities of developers to find the skills they need. There's a big concern about wholesale investment in our city. So, of course, I'm concerned about a cooling down of homes being built in London because of a direct consequence of government policies.
So when Mr Tony Pidgley of Berkeley Homes says that developers face higher risks and regulation, do you take any part of the blame for that in London?
I've got a very good relationship with Berkeley Homes, and they're doing a very good job in London. He's articulating the concerns many developers express about your government's policies.
So it's only the government, nothing to do with what you've done in the last 2 years. No blame again on you for anything in terms of red tape or tax, none whatsoever.
Well, you will know, Chair, from figures produced by other experts over the last 2-3 years, the needs of Londoners to build more homes. One of the things that I've done over the last 2 years is to ensure that we help developers build homes far more quickly by fast-tracking the planning process. We have a number of schemes where permission has been granted, but they've been delayed. That's why I'm working with Oliver Letwin to make sure we can come up with recommendations to speed up the building of homes from permission being granted to homes being built. The London draft plan took on board some of the concerns and opinions made by developers like Barclays as well. And I'll continue to work closely with developers to make sure we build the homes that we need. They've got to be the homes that we need, though, not empty penthouse flats or properties that are built for those who can't afford to live in London. And I want to apologise for making sure we build the homes that we need.
So why have 4 major developers decided to walk away from London then?
Well, I've articulated, Chair, already the concerns many developers have, but also it's not just construction, by the way. There are people in other spheres of job creation in London who are nervous about what government's doing with Brexit. They're nervous about the slow growth in our country. They're nervous about lack of productivity. They're nervous about the pipeline of talent not coming through. They're nervous about the consequences of austerity policy. But I'm quite clear in my mind, the underlying strengths of our city are still there. We've got a dynamic workforce. We've got a situation where we've got an ecosystem that attracts culture, tech, construction, education, life sciences, and long may that continue. But it won't be possible for it to continue successfully if we have a chaotic Brexit exit.
Can I just get back to what you're responsible to, Mr Mayor? Have you at all added to the cost issues and risks that business faces in developing housing in London?
No, I don't think we have. I think what we're doing is a good example of teamwork with developers, with councils, with housing associations. We're now working with community land trusts. And I'm really happy to compare and contrast our record in the first 2 years, bearing in mind the bareness left behind by the previous mayor in relation to progress we've made. And all the conversations I have with developers, housing associations, councils, is that the environment we've created is a pro-affordable housing development environment in London, and it's really important we support that.
Thank you.
Next question is from Assembly Member Desai and relates to violent crime.
Thank you for your question. Keeping Londoners and visitors to our great city safe is my #1 priority. As we've discussed here, London, like the rest of England and Wales, has seen increases in serious violence since 2014. Over the past year, the number of all violent offences rose by 21% across England and Wales and by just over 4% in London. We're invested heavily in enforcement and prevention across the capital. Since I became Mayor, City Hall has invested more than £138 million in policing, with an additional ring-fenced £15 million investment to tackle knife crime this year, £45 million for more prevention services for young people at risk of being pulled into violence, and more services for grassroots organisations to work with local communities. Websites and social media platforms have a responsibility to the millions of young people too. While it can be used for good, social media and the internet can also be used to inflame tensions and escalate violence quicker than ever before. That's why it's vital that social media companies toughen up their guidelines and work with partners to ensure appalling content which glamorises criminal gang culture and incites violence do not appear online. Whilst none of us want to stifle creativity or freedom of expression, we must take action when online videos are inflaming conflicts on our streets that could result in the tragic deaths of our young people. Will be continue to call on social media companies to step up their responsibilities and take action to ensure their platforms are not used to incite violence. I welcome the government having now announced an investment into a new national police capability of around 20 police officers and staff in the Met Project Alpha to tackle gang-related activity on social media. Just finally, my Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime has met with the Managing Director of Google UK to push for tougher action on this issue, and Google have told us they're committed to working with MOPAC and the Met Operation Domain to invest in tackling this, which is important.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, can I welcome everything that you're doing in this field. 3 questions. The number of community organisations, such as Glitch UK in my constituency, that do very good work in this area. Glitch UK specifically monitor online violence against women and girls. Will you get your office to familiarise you with the work of such groups, and more importantly, what support can be given to them?
On that one, if you, some of the details, I'll make sure MOPAC speak with them and meet with them.
I will. In fact, the Glitch UK ambassador is in Geneva right now at the United Nations seminar, and she's going to talk about the work that you're doing in this area. I just had a text from her in the last few minutes. Very specifically, Commander Jim Stokely, who I believe is the Met's lead on gang crime, has spoken about the Met working with the CPS to explore new ways of using powers that the police have at their disposal to tackle online footage, which incites violence, similar to what counter-terrorism officers are doing to remove dangerous materials from the web. What are your views about all this?
I think it's a good example of lessons being learned from other spheres we can use in this area as well. And I think Jim Stokely's got a lot of experience in this area, and we should take on board what he's saying to use technology at their disposal to tackle the problem. I've met with the social media companies too, and they're happy to transfer lessons learned, particularly around terrorism, for this area too as well.
Right. The Met recently pushed for a criminal behaviour order to be used to prevent a group of young men appearing in music videos, which incite violence. There's a fair bit of publicity, Sunday Evening Standard, about this. Do you think such legislation can be used more widely to target those who place such materials? So
the good news is, this is an example where 5 members of this criminal gang were handed, in addition to the normal sentences, criminal behaviour orders, which prevents them from making drill music glorifying violence. The good news is we've seen in Birmingham similar use of this as well, and my understanding is that we MOPAC will work with the Law Commission to analyse laws around offensive online communication, because you're right, we've got to use all the tools in our toolkit to make sure we stop young people glorifying violence.
And finally, do you agree that action to address online abuse should be part of a comprehensive strategy which also addresses issues such as education and housing, which in my opinion shapes the violence in the music and videos which we are seeing?
I mean, this has got to be part of the public health approach. It's really important. It's been tough on the causes of violent crime, which can be complex in its roots, but also enforcement tough on the causes as well, and it's really important that we do that.
And of course, social media can also be used in a very positive way, such as the London Needs Your Life campaign.
Well, can I say, we shouldn't, I mean, your concerns shouldn't mean that you're casting aspersions on all social media. It's a source of good. Generally speaking, we've got to make sure we tackle the problems, though.
Thank you, sir.
Assembly Member Pidgeon, relating to the performance of TfL.
Thank you. TfL are improving the health and quality of life for all Londoners by delivering a modern, affordable and accessible public transport system. Since I became Mayor, TfL fares have frozen and we are delivering the greatest transport modernisation programme in London's history. Customer satisfaction is over 80% on all public transport modes that measure it. On London Underground, there are more journeys and more kilometres operated than in previous years. Passenger delays due to service disruptions are down. On our roads, hours of serious and severe disruption has dropped by around 2/3 since 2015-16. TfL has set itself a number of ambitious savings targets since I became Mayor. In the 8 years before I became Mayor, TfL fares rose by a staggering 42% and investment stalled. TfL recognises that on some tube lines with older technology, robust performance plans are required to enable significant improvement. As part of the modernisation programme, TfL is delivering huge capacity and reliability increases on the Circle, District, Hammersmith City and Metropolitan lines. Later this year, TfL will open the central section of the Elizabeth line, which will reduce journey times through central London and relieve pressure on parts of the transport network. When fully open, it will add 10% capacity to the rail network in London and transform how we get across this city. On the bus network, we've seen customer waiting times drop to the lowest level since records began 40 years ago, and this is combined with faster average bus speeds across the network. I'm proud of the work TfL is doing to deliver more accessibility. This includes delivering the 74th step-free London Underground station in Buckhurst Hill in May 2018, biggest investment in step-free access in the tube's history, and will bring the total number of step-free tube stations to more than 100 by the end of the business plan. In January, TfL expanded the Santander cycle scheme. It's building more cycle superhighways and quiet weight routes to encourage Londoners to swap their cars for more sustainable and active ways of travelling. And we've also invested £1.5 billion on the Deep Tube Upgrade programme. TfL's performance is publicly reported on a regular basis against a range of measures.
Okay, I want to look at TfL's record as measured against the specific targets they set, and just last week TfL's Remuneration Committee met and looked at TfL's scorecard for the year. Does it concern you that 13 areas were marked as red, needing urgent attention, including a red indicator on whether TfL is financially sustainable?
I deliberately encourage targets that are stretching. The TfL board is not a board of patsies anymore. It's a board of independent, strong-minded people who hold the TfL to account. I encourage that. And had we had targets that we met quite easily, you would reasonably criticise us for making targets that aren't stretching. Of course, any red signals should be a source of concern, but I'm confident that the TfL team have the expertise to meet these stretching targets.
Okay, but given they're concerned as to whether TfL is financially sustainable, given this, I'd like to know, when did you first know about the £51 million generous payoffs arrangements for TfL officers?
So I've been concerned for some time about the salaries of senior members of TfL staff and the packages. And you'll be aware that one of the things I agreed to do is anybody who earns a salary of more than 100k now is going to come through me to sign off. What I can't do is unilaterally change the contracts agreed by a previous administration with employees who are long-standing employees. And so we've had to streamline TfL's management. You'll be aware, for the first time in TfL's history, operating costs have been reduced, not just 1 year, 2 years in a row. And so often when people who, the management are seeking to leave TfL, the negotiations happen, you're up against a contract that's been agreed before. And so different staff members have different contract arrangements. What I've done, though, is make sure all new contracts are less generous in relation to settlements for golden goodbyes, if you like, than previous ones.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that about new contracts. I know you've announced a review into this, but when did you first know about these severance deals that seem exceedingly generous, to put it mildly?
I think we've known for some time that the contracts agreed by the previous mayor, previous administration, were very generous. Sometimes there's a good reason for that, by the way, because we want to compete for the best. We want to get the best people in the world working for TfL. So I'm not criticising people who work hard getting a decent package. But we've known for some time that some of these packages, particularly bearing in mind the constraints we're facing, would appear to be overly generous. But that's not to say there aren't some people who deserve to receive high remuneration and good packages in TfL.
But do you think it's acceptable for someone to retire but still receive a package of around $440,000 for so-called loss of employment? Seems rather bizarre to the ordinary person on the street.
Well, all I'd say is somebody who used to practice law is if there's a contract, if you breach the contract, you can be sued in a court for compensation, and nobody would want us to pay compensation by way of a court action because a contract's been breached. That's why it's far better to negotiate a contract with both sides agreeing that's less generous But, you know, that's, in the long term, we'll save money. But you're right to express concern in the short term. It does cost.
Costs a lot of money. I'm quite concerned that obviously you're closing the stable door in some ways after the horse has bolted. I accept you're saying these are historic contracts. Both your predecessors sat on TfL's remuneration committee. Will you now take up a place on this committee to ensure that public money is not being paid out in this reckless way and that you've got greater control on the contracts?
If there was evidence that the previous two mayors sitting on the committee led to progress, I'd do that. Clearly it hasn't, because you just talked about the horse door being bolted. What I'd far rather do is make sure we have the right people in place to hold the feet to the fire to the TfL team. You'll have seen progress made in the last 2 years. And that's part and parcel of having a TfL board that's a good board. They're experts that have stretching targets, that understand the importance of making sure contracts are negotiated well.
Will you consider now going on the remuneration committee just to keep an eye on it, maybe just for this current year?
No, I don't need to, because I receive regular reports in relation to new staff. We've got a good TfL team on the remuneration board, but also the evidence is that somebody turned up to a meeting, as the previous two mayors did, let us know progress been made.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're out of time. Is there any more on this one? No? Astonishing. The next question relates to ULEZ and it comes from Assembly Member Bacon.
Thank you, Chair. Tackling London's lethal air and safeguarding the health of Londoners requires bold action. Air pollution is a national health crisis, and I refuse to stand back as thousands of Londoners breathe in air so filthy that it shortens their life expectancy, harms their lungs and worsens chronic illness. I promise bold measures to tackle our shameful air pollution, and an expanded ultra-low emission zone and tighter standards for buses, coaches and lorries across London, in conjunction with the Central London ULEZ, will transform the air that millions of Londoners breathe. It may be worth setting out how the impact of the expanded ULEZ has been assessed. TfL undertook a thorough and comprehensive assessment of the impacts of an expanded ULEZ based on highways, transport and air quality emission models. This was backed by surveys of Londoners to understand how people would choose to respond. A fully integrated impact assessment on the health, qualities and economic impacts of ULEZ was also carried out by an independent consultancy. All this information was publicly available during the public consultation and thoroughly informed my decision. These assessments showed that all areas of London will benefit, with over 100,000 fewer Londoners living in areas exceeding the legal nitrogen dioxide limits and a 28% reduction in road transport NOx emissions London-wide. Less than 10% of roads will be exceeding legal limits in 2021 because of the action we're taking. The consultation received the largest response to any in TfL's history, and I'm pleased the clear majority of Londoners supported our proposals. TfL listened to issues raised in the public consultation and the integrated impact assessment, which is why extra time has been given for disabled tax class vehicles, wheelchair adapted private hire vehicles and minibuses run by not-for-profit organisations to comply. I know that some motorists, especially low-income households and small businesses, will need help switching to greener transport options, and that's why I continue to urge government to deliver a scrappage fund to get the dirtiest cars off the road. Michael Gove attended the National Clean Air Summit I hosted yesterday. He's recognised London's leadership in this area and promised to consider the call from representatives of 14 different cities across the UK to establish a National Vehicle Renewal Fund, which is another name for a scrappage fund.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I want to ask you a little bit about the logistics of the expanded ULEZ, not the inner London ULEZ, the expanded out to the North and South Circular. How will you enforce that expanded ULEZ?
One of the reasons why we need more. One of the criticisms made, some people responded saying, "Go quicker." One of the reasons why you can't is because of the work required for the infrastructure in relation to natural zones. So with Central London, we've got natural zones, the congestion charge. With coaches, lorries and buses, we've got the low emission zone. That sort of infrastructure is there for 2020. But up to North South Circular, more work is required by TfL working with the private sector to get the infrastructure ready. Up to North South Circular gives us natural boundaries, the roads, and all the advice I have is that October 2021 is the time they will need to get the infrastructure in place to make it work.
So are we talking about cameras on the perimeter of the zone, a bit like the congestion charge?
Current technology looks that way. That's the plan at the moment.
What about enforcement within the zone?
What do you mean?
Well, if 3.7 million Londoners live within the confines of the North and the South Circular, a large number of those may have vehicles that don't meet the standards required by the ultra-low emission zone. Therefore, I would assume that you would want to enforce the zone against those people that are living in the zone. How do you enforce it? You've got cameras on the perimeter, but they'll only pick up people coming into the zone. How do you enforce it within the zone?
You mean within the seat? You mean somebody who lives outside central London?
If somebody lives just south of the North Circular, they are within the expanded ultra-low emission zone. If they don't drive their car to cross the border, cameras on the border won't pick them up. How will you enforce it?
Well, some of it is registration of the vehicles. One of the things we're working with DVLA about is to get more data about the cars that are registered. Mm-hmm. One of the concerns we have is retrofitting. So you may have an older vehicle and have retrofitted it so it's not pollutant. And so one of the conversations we're having is with DVLA to get this data, because at the moment the T-charge can be construed as being a bit crude because we're using Euro 4, Euro 6. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things we're going to work on over the next few years. And the DVLA/DFT are quite receptive to sharing technology.
If somebody is living within the zone and their vehicle doesn't comply with the standards required for the ultra-low emission zone, but it just sits on their drive and they don't turn it on, how could they be enforced?
They won't have to pay. They will not. If it's sitting in a driveway and not putting out toxic stuff, they won't pay the charge.
But I take you back to the question I asked earlier. How would you know that? We've discussed cameras on the perimeter of the zone. If people are living within the zone in non-compliant vehicles that they may or may not use, and you don't have cameras everywhere in the zone, how would you know that they're using their vehicles? So
TfL, I should explain, so TfL and councils have cameras all across London. And you'll be aware, for example, we use it in policing with automatic name recognition plates and all the rest of it and stuff. And so I'm confident about the number of cameras across London. The issue is boundaries and stuff. And so that's one of the things we'll be working on over the course of the next few years. But that's not one of the concerns that we have. The concerns we have is in relation to the border issues you raised that we saw in 2003 with C-charge. And we think we've learned the lessons in the border issues. I'm less troubled from what I've read. Sorry, the experts are less troubled about cars sitting on driveways within the area of a zone. The issue more is the borders.
Yeah, where I'm going at with this, Mr. Mayor, is that, as I said, 3.7 million Londoners live within the expanded zone. And it seems to me that there has to be some measure of whether or not they are using non-compliant vehicles within the zone in order to make the policy effective. Yeah. I think what you've just suggested is that you might be able to retrofit existing technology or repurpose existing technology within the zone. So
the data we've got does have a figure for the number of vehicles who are caught now. It projects the number of vehicles that by natural progression people buy new vehicles, and they'll know this come around the corner, we'll buy new vehicles. And so there's a mapping exercise of the number of vehicles who will not be compliant by 2021. Yeah. The issue you raise is what happens with those vehicles that may be not compliant but aren't being driven around, that they're not inadvertently paying the cost. Yeah. That's not been an issue raised with me, but I'm very happy to go away and give you a specific answer rather than...
Yes, I'd like to take you up on that, because I think this might be something that Transport for London have not properly considered.
No, Chair, can I write specifically on that issue, because I think it's a fair point.
Building on that issue, though, Mr. Mayor, how much will the cost of the infrastructure required to enforce the expanded ultra-low emission zone be?
That figure is available. I think it's publicly available as well. I can find it for you now, but that figure is available. It's part of the consultation.
Shall I help you with it? The figure that I think TfL put in response to their consultation document was between 90 and 130 million pounds. Does that sound familiar to you?
That sounds familiar.
Okay. When you do come back to me, can you give me a breakdown as to how that figure has been arrived at?
I'm sure we can, Chair. Subject to commercial sensitivities, I'm sure we can. Subject to, or a private briefing, I'm sure we can.
The reason for my interest, Mr. Mayor, is that when the congestion charge was introduced in 2002, a paper published by Transport for London in 2007, which assessed the impacts of the congestion charge, costed it at £162 million to put the infrastructure in. Now, the boundary of the congestion charge zone is 16 kilometres. The boundary of the expanded ultra-low emission zone, the North and South Circular, is 76 kilometres. And yet the figure that has been quoted by TfL on your behalf of 90 to 130 is lower than it cost them for the congestion charge 16 years ago with older technology. Do you think that figure will stack up?
Yeah, I think you've explained why your first question deserves a proper answer. Can I provide you with a specific answer in the breakdown for because you're right to raise a question about reassurance you require for the 90 to 130 million pounds if it is the case that a previous scheme that was smaller cost more. So can I go away and
It's a TFL report. I'm happy to
Yeah,
send you the
no,
report,
no.
Mr Mayor.
Listen, I mean, can I go and provide you a proper answer and answer your question, because we want to make sure we don't plan to spend a smaller amount, but actually the evidence suggests it's going to be a bigger amount. We want to make sure we get value for money. And
It's two issues. It's that, but it's also the enforcement within the zone. I'm particularly keen that people who may have older vehicles, who don't use them every day, don't start picking up £12.50 charges every single day just because they happen to live inside the zone.
I'll write to Senator Bacon, but if the Transport Committee wants a specific presentation on this as well, I'm also happy to organise that. But I'll write to Senator Bacon on the two issues raised, which are issues that I accept should be responded to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Assembly Member.
We've gone into quite a lot of the detail of how things might be enforced from October 2021. But we haven't really talked about what's going to happen between now and then.
Yeah.
We've already introduced the T-charge. I think that's been successful. From April 2019, we're going to see the stricter measures in the smaller current congestion zone, the new central London ultra-low emission zone. But the arrangements that we've just been discussing when it expands out are not for 3.5 years. So surely one of the things that we need to focus on now is what publicity we're going to be giving to Londoners about changing away from these vehicles that may or may not need to be focused on in the way that Assembly Member Bacon has just been talking about. What arrangements are going to be made for helping Londoners away from polluting vehicles?
I mean, this sort of stepping stone approach is very important, because I think a big bang would be quite harsh for many, particularly low-income families, small businesses, charities, but also the technology is not ready yet. So the T-charge was important as a transition to the ULEZ, which will come in, as you're right to remind me, 17 months before originally planned, April next year, the world's first ULEZ. That will provide us with a lot of information we can use as we roll out ULEZ. In 2020, it will apply to all of London for coaches, buses and lorries, and for 2021 October, up to the North and South Circular for all vehicles. Now, the reason why it's important to telegraph our intention is people can change their behaviour. So if you're thinking about procuring vehicles for your business, if you're thinking about a new fleet, if you're thinking about changing the family car, you now know the intention is of ultra-low emission zone, and so hopefully you'll buy a car that's less polluting, which is important for all of us, improving the quality of air and the cost to the NHS and the cost to productivity as well. The good news is that actually the Euro 6 and Euro 4 requirements in 2021 are such that actually you'd have to have a pretty old vehicle, either diesel or petrol, to still have to pay the fee required. So I'm hoping some of the concerns that Senator Bacon is raising, quite reasonably, which have been probably raised to him by Londoners, will be addressed by passage of time. But they're still ironing out issues which we want to do before then. And so one of the good things about having T-charge, then ULEZ Central London, then all of London for coach, buses and lorries before the full rollout is we can iron out any problems, but remind people about this change coming around the corner as well.
Do you think it's quite disappointing that when the World Health Organization declared diesel to be definitely carcinogenic in 2012, that the previous mayor did nothing to publicise that to Londoners, and that we may find more Londoners went on to purchase diesels unnecessarily after that point?
Well, I mean, I'm critical of the previous mayor not taking enough action in this area, but I've got to accept responsibility as a politician who was encouraging people to move away from petrol to go towards diesel because of carbon emissions. I think the reality is the science we had 10, 15, 20 years ago was saying, look, the big ill is carbon. It is by the way, big ill. Petrol emits more carbon than diesel, and experts encourage people to move away from petrol to diesel, including low-income families, including charities, including businesses. We've since discovered diesel emits lots of NOx, nitrogen dioxide, particulate matters, and so I think these people need help. And that's why I'm saying to the government, look, help these people with a national diesel scrappage fund to subsidise, give them a carrot to move away from diesel to cleaner forms of vehicles, making it easier to walk, easier to cycle, better public transport that's cleaner as well. But also, as part of a package of measures we've got to do, I think the idea of sticking my head in the sand, like the previous mayor did, and saying no to extending ULEZ or no to taking these progressive measures is a bad step.
finally, Mr Mayor, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with Assembly Member Bacon's own report, which suggested that the ULEZ should not be expanded, but that we should approach London's appalling air quality by having a small ULEZ and then having a series of hotspots to tackle. Do you think that kind of tinkering at the edges would work, or would you like to send a message to people on Clean Air Day today, which it is, to say that you are up for expanding the ULEZ and you're keen to ensure that Londoners' health is improved?
No, well, thank you for reminding all of us about today and the importance of today. Yesterday we hosted in London a Clean Air Summit, historic summit. We had mayors, leaders, councillors, representatives from cities, regions and towns representing more than 20 million people here in London. And they looked to us as leaders in this area. And they looked to us to set an example. And it was really encouraging to see the Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, there as well. And I think, look, the choice is to be, the last generation that doesn't get it, or to be the first generation that gets it. I don't know which I choose to be.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Assembly Member Bacon.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Mr Mayor, just coming back on that last point from Assembly Member Cooper, I'm sure you've read the TfL response to the consultation cover to cover, as I have. So you'll be familiar with point 8.6.15 on page 91, which reads as follows. Considering the benefits expected from the earlier implementation of the Central London ULEZ in 2019, and the application of ULEZ standards to heavy vehicles London-wide from 2020, it is likely that targeted local measures, such as local road closures, vehicle restrictions and other interventions, could be equally effective and are more likely to reduce exposure and bring areas of non-compliance in outer London into limit value compliance in a quicker time frame than an expansion of the ULEZ to cover light vehicles in outer London. Do you agree with that?
I think we need a package of measures. That's one of the reasons why I was pleased to announce yesterday the biggest rollout of fully electric double-decker buses in Europe taking place yesterday.
Yep.
That's why I've welcomed the low-emission bus zones, which has seen an improvement in the quality of varied parts of London, including Putney and Brixton. But also I'm fully behind ULEZ being extended to all of London for coaches, buses and lorries in 2020, but up to the North and South Circular by 2021 as well.
So you do agree with that paragraph or you don't?
I agree we need a package of measures, including
that's not the question I asked you, Mr. Mayor. I asked you whether you agreed to that paragraph or not. With which I'm in full accord. I agree with it completely.
You can't isolate a paragraph in a detailed response and say, do you agree with that? Without looking at the
it's central
context.
to the argument, though, isn't it, Mr. Mayor? And Assembly Member Cooper has just tried to
what
let's put it that way.
What Assembly Member Cooper is doing is reminding us that that same group, TfL, are recommending ULEZ being extended up to the North South Circular in 2021. Now, you're cherry-picking one part of a recommendation made by TfL.
It's a very extensive paragraph in a very detailed report, which I've read.
It is TfL that's recommending us move to a wider ULEZ up to the North and South Circular, and you're cherry-picking one part of the TfL recommendation rather than the entire one, which is extending ULEZ, coaches, buses and lorries till 2020.
The point speaks for itself.
And, well, I know, but I think the Chair made the point. I mean, Assembly Member Bacon is cherry-picking one part of a report which is supportive of a package of measures that Assembly Member Cooper fully supports.
It's angels dancing on the head of a pin, this one. Any more? Can we please now go to the question from Assembly Member McCartney, deferred sentences for young people?
Thank you, Chair. The Met and MOPAC are currently exploring two pilots of deferred prosecutions. Both are at different stages of development and have slightly different aims. Instead of charging a suspect immediately in a deferred prosecution arrangement, the suspect is given a time-bound opportunity to voluntarily enter into a contract with specific conditions, which, if met, mean the prosecution will not be proceeded with. David Lammy's review into the disproportionality in the criminal justice system suggested that deferred prosecutions could present an opportunity to tackle disproportionality of outcomes in the criminal justice system for BAME communities. I'm working with the Met, the MOJ, CPS, youth offending teams and the Victims Commissioner for London to develop such a pilot in London, including through my London Criminal Justice Board, where this was discussed last week. The scheme, which will not require an admission of guilt by the offender and will help tackle BAME disproportionality alongside delivering benefits for young offenders and reducing crime. Similarly, in July, a deferred prosecution scheme called Turning Point will be run by the Met along with Cambridge University and Barnet, and then the rest of the BCU, Brent and Harrow. The scheme will be open to juveniles and adults meeting specific criteria, that is, low-level offenders who would not be eligible for prison. It will compare the effectiveness of deferred prosecution to court prosecution and simple cautions in reducing reoffending and delivering better outcomes. The trial will run for 2 years with a full evaluation. There is no proposal to run the trial London-wide at this time. The purpose of the Met's pilot is to test the effectiveness of deferred prosecution schemes in general, looking at reducing reoffending and increasing victim satisfaction, and building an evidence base for policing policy and practice. According to early analysis, existing deferred prosecution schemes which have been trialled in West Midlands and Durham have shown the potential to reduce the harm of crime as well as reoffending, rehabilitate suspected offenders, and save the police and criminal justice system costs.
Thank you, and I really welcome this pilot. I think the Durham and West Midlands scheme have shown that victim satisfaction has actually risen dramatically as well, and this is not a soft option because the young people involved will have to undergo intensive one-to-one training and mentoring. So my question really is, does the Met have the resources and that support to actually offer that package of really, deep intervention with these young people?
Well, that's a really important point. It's got to be done properly, and we've seen West Midlands and Durham it being done properly. It appears we have the resources to do this properly. For the pilot, we've been able to procure the required treatment programme with no additional costs, which is good. Barnet's integrated offender management and youth offending teams have been involved in the work taking place there. The Met's working closely with the review officers, custody staff and offender managers, and so at the moment it looks like we've got sufficient resources, but you're right, if you do it on the cheap, it's not going to work properly and it won't be a proper pilot, so we've got to make sure we get it right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Assemblymember Dismore and relates to Brexit. We also have a question from Assemblymember Curtin relating to Brexit. Do you want to roll them together or do you want them treated separately? Yeah, okay. So we'll roll them together, Mr. Mayor. If you think you can do that, I'm sure you can. Right.
Thank you. London face significant challenges after the referendum that hasn't yet subsided. Many businesses say the uncertainty caused is damaging the UK's competitiveness and making us a less attractive destination for investment and talent. The 1 million Londoners who are EU citizens living and working in London worry about their future status. Time prevents me going through everything we've done, so this isn't an exhaustive answer, but to mention some of the key work we've done over the last 2 years. I launched the award-winning London is Open campaign to showcase to the world that the capital remains as open to international talent, trade and investment as ever. I've travelled alongside delegations from my international business programme to Canada, the US, India and Pakistan, forging new business links and banging the drum for London. I've also provided additional funding to London and Partners to expand significantly its overseas footprint in 5 additional key markets of Paris, Berlin, Bangalore, Shenzhen and Chicago. My Deputy Mayor for Business, Rajesh Agrawal, and I have met with different businesses from across London to learn what they need from the final deal to protect their jobs, investment and growth. I've also convened a panel of experts spanning different sectors of London's economy to advise me and inform my position on the host of issues Brexit poses for London's economy. In addition to publishing a detailed response to the government's Brexit white paper, I have meetings with the Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union, David Davis. Most recently, I met with him on Monday to ensure the government doesn't shy away from the challenges there are. I've also given evidence to the Exiting the European Union Select Committee, and I'm appearing before the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Select Committee next week. I called on the government to agree on early status quo transition period to give businesses greater certainty. I lobbied them to immediately guarantee all EU citizens will be entitled to remain in the UK after Brexit. I've lobbied the government to ensure the UK's continued access to important European programmes for London's higher education and cultural sectors continue. In January, I published independent economic analysis that we commissioned, which showed that crashing out of the single market and customs union could hit the economy and lead to 90,000 fewer jobs in London. The best way to avoid this risk and to protect London and the UK economy is to negotiate a deal which keeps us in the single market and customs union. I'll continue to press this case with the government. And most recently, yesterday, I met with the European Parliament's representatives in the Brexit negotiations, G. Verhofstadt, to discuss a range of issues.
Thank you for that reply. Would you agree that the Prime Minister has shown herself to be more concerned about managing the deep euro splits within the Conservative Party than she is in getting a good deal from the EU? And as it looks like we're heading for a hard Brexit by default, as the government can't agree on anything, what contingency plans are you putting in place, bearing in mind that we're scheduled to leave the UK in just 9 months?
One of the concerns that I have is, as a consequence of the Prime Minister leading in her party's interest rather than the national interest, we could fall off the cliff edge and have an extreme hard Brexit. The bad news is a lot of the powers are with national government, not with cities, regions, let alone the Mayor of London. So one of the things we're doing is continuing to lobby the government to make sure they understand what our needs are. You'll be aware the first part is the withdrawal, second part is future arrangements with the government, and we'll continue to work with the government and also meeting key stakeholders in London. Most recently, I was at the Life Sciences Crick Institute during London Tech Week. They're concerned about an extreme hard Brexit. The good news, though, is the Europeans don't want an extreme hard Brexit. It's not in their interest, nor is it in ours. So I'm hoping that cooler, calmer heads will prevail and we'll have a decent deal with the EU.
The 14th YouGov poll in a row, going back to last summer, has found that the majority of people in the country now believe it's wrong to leave the EU. Do you think the time is coming when there should be a second referendum to either approve or reject any agreement, if there is one, and to allow the option of staying in the EU? And will you support the March for a People's Vote this Saturday afternoon?
Okay, look, I campaigned for us to remain in the EU. I'm still heartbroken that we've, as a country, chosen to leave the EU. I stand by the results of the referendum, as unhappy as I am by those results of the referendum. We can explain why people voted to leave the EU, what they were voted for, and all the rest of it, but I think the referendum, was close, but a win's a win. The key thing, though, is to make sure the deal the government does right by our country. Nobody voted to become poorer. We're going to make sure the deal is one that benefits UK jobs, growth and prosperity, and I'll continue to be an advocate for a good deal for London and our country. And the point I'd make is this: the government's got to realise if London struggles and suffers, so does the country. Similarly, if the country suffers and struggles, so does London. And so it's in the government's interest, if they want Brexit to work, to listen to what we're saying in London. Of course, I can envisage a scenario where there could be a second referendum, but let's cross that bridge if and when it comes.
Okay.
Assembly Member Curtin.
I don't know if you want to read out the answer you had to my original question. Okay. Well, it's good that you say that there shouldn't be a second referendum, because that's absolutely the case. We've had a referendum, and the people of the country voted to leave the European Union, and also to leave the single market, and also to leave the customs union as well. And do you acknowledge that the people of the United Kingdom as a whole were right, and people who in the political sphere, such as you, who may disagree with the people, need to respect the vote and the will of the people in our democracy?
Chair, I mean, the reason why Mayor's question time can sometimes be frustrating for me, let alone for you, is often questions are based on false premises. And this is a classic example of a question being asked on a false premise. There is no evidence at all that somebody who voted to leave the EU, for example, necessarily voted to leave the single market. There is no evidence at all that somebody who voted to leave the EU necessarily voted to leave the customs union. There is no evidence at all that somebody who voted to leave the EU voted to make themselves poorer. There is no evidence at all that somebody who voted to leave the EU wanted their neighbour, who may be an EU citizen, to be uncertain about his or her future. So I can't accept the premise of that question. That's one of the reasons why I say this to the government. You, when you negotiate with the EU, must realise, yes, of course, the British public voted to leave the European Union. That doesn't mean we voted to leave the single market, the customs union, and to have uncertainty for EU citizens. And it's possible to have a deal leaving the EU that makes us very, very less well off, or not as bad. And the research we've published from independent economists at Cambridge Econometrics shows of the 5 options before the government: hard Brexit, no transition, leading to transition with single market customs union. The one that's best for us is on this extreme. Well, UKIP may not like it.
Well, Mr.
That's
Mayor,
the evidence.
Mr. Mayor, you talk about false premises, and you talk about your report from Cambridge Econometrics, but I mean the whole report and the scenarios that you've talked about is actually based on assumptions which are unknowable. On page 6 of your report, it says it was assumed that if we stay in the EU, that there would be a 1.9% growth in investment over the period 2021 to 2030. But then it was assumed that if we leave, that growth in investment will be 1%. But those are simply assumptions. They're not based on any evidence or any research. They're just figures which are pulled out of the air, and it's in your report which you're referring to. If your whole answer is based on a report which is just based on assumptions which are unknowable going forward to 2030, which no one can know about, isn't your argument nonsense?
I'll tell you what is knowable. is the NHS hasn't seen £350 million invested in it since we voted to leave the European Union. I'll tell you what is noble is the uncertainty employers are articulating to me about the uncertainty caused by Brexit. I'll tell you what is noble is the evidence I have from 4 men and women on building sites who are talking about construction workers returning to country of origin because of uncertainty. I'll tell you what is noble is conversations I've had with Londoners who've been here for 10, 20, 30 years who now think this city is alien to them because of concerns they have about their future status in this country.
Well, Mr. Mayor, what's also
I'll tell you what is noble is the fact that this government has got no plans in relation to what happens if they can't reach a deal.
We know, Mr. Mayor, that there's been more direct investment into the UK in 2017 than in any previous year. So despite, because of the referendum, I would argue that there is a lot of confidence in the UK going forward. People are looking forward to the wealth and prosperity and freedom it will bring and looking forward to Brexit Day.
Well,
and
Chair,
time up. That sounded
That's
like
a good
sound like a good sound bite. There we are.
It did worry Louis Chamise, didn't it?
Before going on to the next question, can we welcome, please, the school council from the Edinburgh Primary School from Waltham Forest? Right, there we go. Okay. The next question is from Assembly Member Prince and is about motorcyclists.
Thank you, Chair. Motorcycles and mopeds play an important role in many Londoners' lives and businesses for travel and delivering goods. Motorcycle riders face unacceptable danger on the road, and I'm determined to address this. The transport strategy I produce as Mayor provides for the first time a specific focus on improving motorcycle safety. I'll work with TfL, the boroughs, police and the motorcycle industry to improve the safety as part of my Vision Zero ambition to eliminate death and serious injury from the transport network by 2041. TfL is working with the Motorcycle Industry Association to increase the number of accredited training providers in London to improve the quality of motorcycle training. TfL is also working with the Fleet Operator Recognition Scheme to create a recognised safety standard for motorcycle delivery companies. Last year, I launched 3 entirely new training courses to boost rider confidence, skills and knowledge. We're now for training courses to meet different needs that go beyond the minimum required by law. In May this year, TfL launched a new road safety campaign which includes messages targeted at motorcyclists. This has been advertised on posters as well as through digital and radio advertising. TfL is applying guidance in its Urban Motorcycle Design Handbook to embed motorcycle safety within the design process of all TfL schemes and through the borough-specific local implementation plan process to encourage boroughs to apply these principles to their roads. I'm also calling on all London boroughs to allow motorcycles in bus lanes, build on the access they have to TfL roads in the capital. There's still more we can do, though, Chair, which is why I'm lobbying the government to follow our lead and deliver on their proposals to improve motorcycle training standards. I also know theft is a real issue for motorcyclists. My Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, Sophie Linden, and I have been working with manufacturers of the most stolen motorcycle brands in London to improve their security. The need for secure motorcycle parking across London is also highlighted in the latest borough LIPG guidance. Under Operation Venus, the Met are implementing a range of innovative and intelligence-led tactics to tackle motorcycle crime. Officers have deployed new specialist lightweight scrambler bikes, mobile stingers, and a forensic DNA tagging spray that, when deployed, can be used to connect a thief with the vehicle they may have stolen. The impact of this activity, along with the Be Safe marketing campaign reminding bikers to lock up their bikes, saw a 55% decline on motorcycle-enabled crime in May when compared to its peak back in July. Finally, Chair, the Met are working hard to tackle motorcycle crime, but it's not a problem that can be solved by policing alone. Manufacturers must take responsibility for their customers and the safety of Londoners. I've raised my concerns in a letter to the European Association of Motorcycle Manufacturers, and earlier this year I convened a meeting with the Motorcycle Industry Association where I made clear the importance of designing out crime to ensure this crime type is tackled at its root.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, thank you for that very full answer. You're investing for push bikes around about £154 million a year to help push bikes be more safe around London. Can you tell me, Mr Mayor, or you can give me a written answer if you like, how much you're spending on motorcycle safety?
So the reason why there is cycling-specific budgets is because of the infrastructure aimed at encouraging cyclists. The roads that motorcyclists use are roads that are used by other vehicles as well, so it's part of a package of measures around Vision Zero. On specific motorcycle measures, I can give you some examples. So the cost of motorcycle training interventions in 17-18 is £280,000. There's a wide range of initiatives and budgets that deliver safety benefits to motorcyclists that is encompassed in all road user improvements. But I'm happy to write to the Assembly member to disaggregate some of this, but
if you could,
where it's possible.
The bottom line, Mr. Mayor, is that if you're a motorcyclist, you're 4 times more likely to die than if you ride a push bike. We had 9 cyclists die in 2016, which is the last year for which we have the data available. We had 36 motorcyclists die in the same period. So we really do want you to concentrate on motorcycle safety and invest more in the infrastructure to help motorcyclists. But I'm now very short on time, so I'm going to have to push forward on that, if I may. What I'd like to ask you next, Mr. Mayor, is about the ULEZ zone. I know we've already had an interesting debate on ULEZ, but Mr. Mayor, when you go onto the website for TfL, it's very clear there that it says the enforcement of the ULEZ will be based on the declared emissions rather than the age of the vehicle. That's what it says, and that sounds quite reasonable. But can you really say that it is fairer to charge somebody who's riding a 25-year-old 125cc push bike for the ULEZ charge and yet not make the same charge for a brand new Rolls-Royce?
Okay, let me just make sure I understand the question. The question is the ULEZ standard for motorcycles unfair compared to cars? Is that the point you're making?
Well, pretty much, yeah.
Right. So what I'll try to answer the previous question by explaining, because of the lack of progress made with DVLA so far, we're using Euro standards. So for petrol cars, it's Euro 4. Petrol cars and vans, Euro 4. For diesel vehicles, it's Euro 6. For motorcycles, it's actually Euro 3. So actually, I could be criticised for being too lenient in relation to Euro standards for motorcycles. The reason why it's important to say that is because actually the vast majority of motorcycles already meet Euro 3 standards, because Euro 3 basically means motorcycles licensed after July 2007. And the number I have is, the calculations TfL have made is more than 80% of motorcycles in 2019, when the ULEZ comes in, will be compliant. But it is a fact that there are some motorcycles which do churn out toxic stuff, and as Senator Cooper has articulated, we need to make sure we reduce the number of toxic stuff in the air, and one of the ways we're going to do that is to encourage behavioural change.
Right, Mr. Mayor, I mean, the point I'm making here is that a Rolls-Royce Ghost 6.6 V12 produces 27 grams of NOx and 327 grams of CO2. Now that is exempt. So 27 and 327, that's exempt. A 1995 Sangyang 125cc moped produces 0.195, so that's 270 times less NOx and produces 55 grams of CO2, which is 6 times less. How can it be fair? And your figures are right about the ownership, but what you'll find, Mr. Mayor, is that somewhere in the region of 50% of those people who use their bikes who are on low incomes, they're the ones who own the older bikes. And my appeal to you, Mr. Mayor, is can you just give them an extension or just make some movement on what you're doing to give them more time? These people can't afford to buy a new car, a new push bike, let alone, a new motorbike, let alone a new Rolls-Royce, and yet they're being taxed when their emissions are far, far less than others who will be polluting more and won't be paying the charge.
Well, Chair, I think the Assembly members are making my point for me. We need the government to provide real emission figures, and that's the point I'm making to DVLA. The point I'm making to DFT and DVLA is, look, because the government aren't sharing emissions from vehicles, we're having to use Euro 3, 4 or 6 figures, which that's just one example of the anomalies. There are other examples, as I referred to in answer to the previous question. If you retrofit your vehicle, you're not emitting the same amount of toxic stuff. So I will pray in aid the example of the Rolls-Royce given by the Assembly member when I lobby again for DFT and DVLA to provide this data, because we want real data in relation to emissions that these vehicles are emitting.
So, Mr. Mayor, there is a lot more that I need to raise, but I'm sorry we've run out of time.
Okay.
Can I just ask you, therefore, Mr. Mayor, will you agree to one of our wonderful meetings with you and me and the representatives from the London motorcycle industry for them to discuss their concerns with you, Mr. Mayor?
Of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Shah on sprinklers.
Thank you, Chair. Whenever I meet with Grenfell survivors and local residents, I'm struck by their strength and dignity, as I know you are as well. A year on from the tragedy, we must never forget those who lost their lives, and we must ensure every step is taken to prevent a tragedy like this from ever happening again. That's why I support a wide package of fire safety measures for new and existing residential buildings. As a key part of this, I support the principle in your report that sprinklers should be a mandatory requirement for all new buildings over 18 metres. I'd like to thank you and the Planning Committee for your vital work on this. London Fire Commissioner Danny Colton has spoken frequently about the benefits of sprinklers and the difference they can make in extinguishing fires, raising the alarm, and most importantly, saving lives. I also believe that sprinklers should be retrofitted to existing buildings as part of the risks-based approach to fire safety. I welcome the National Labour Party's proposal for a £1 billion fund for sprinkler retrofitting, and I urge the government to step up and match this commitment to ensure that existing homes are made safe as quickly as possible. As we await any specific recommendations of the public inquiry, I welcome those councils, housing associations and private building owners who in the meanwhile are proactively retrofitting sprinklers to give their residents confidence in the safety of their homes. As we also await the government's response to Dame Judith Hackett's review of building regulations, I'd urge ministers to go further than the review recommended on sprinklers. I was pleased that Dame Judith recognised the role of planning can play in building safety, something I've tried to achieve with my draft on the plan, but I'm disappointed the review failed to ban combustible cladding in high-rise buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your comprehensive response. Now, I accept that there are some key recommendations and priorities which are of legislative nature, not entirely within the scope of your or our terms of reference, something though we will be pushing hard to happen in the short and long term. But there is something which has got tremendous scope under your leadership to progress as one of the key recommendations. And that is for existing high-rise buildings such as care homes be retrofitted in London over the next 5 years. And this requires you to create a 50 million London retrofitting fund to retrofit 200 existing high-rise residential buildings. And this again has potential of retrofitting some 20,000 high-rise dwellings in London over the next 5 years. Now, this has got two elements, this recommendation or this requirement. One is that no doubt we have to lobby the government for their share of this 50 million package. You have to joint fund 25 million, half of that figure. Can this be very actively and urgently progressed from the perspective that, you know, this is where we do have an opportunity to make that difference in a big way for those highly vulnerable community within London through retrofitting?
Thank you for the way you raised your point. I mean, unfortunately, what I'm not able to do is to divert monies away from, for example, the affordable housing programme to retrofit these homes that need retrofitting. What I will continue to do is to lobby the government in relation to support to councils, housing associations, but also there are many private owners as well who need assistance. But you're right, there are a specific category of homes, care homes, retirement homes and hostels, which need support and don't have the sprinklers in them. And I'll carry on lobbying the government and pray and aid the report from you. But I think I'm simply not allowed to divert monies from a programme agreed with the government on affordable homes to retrofit care homes, etc.
I accept that there is the sort of funding kind of concerns, but from your perspective, the point is that this is a program established or planned over a 5-year period. Your share of 25 million means 5 million, almost like a starter fund for a year. Is this something that you cannot seriously go back and look into, because what this needs is a good kickstart. And that is something through your leadership and working and lobbying very, very hard the government, it can be achieved. This is something I think we need to do, because I'm very heartened with the Fire Commissioner's response to the report, where she said that Fire Brigade are considering their approach around mandatory sprinkler requirements for buildings over 18 meters. So whilst Fire Authority is doing their job in that sense to really lobby the government, I think from our perspective, this is something very, very worth seriously looking into.
Well, I mean, your question is based on a number of hypotheticals. One, the government agrees to match fund. Two, that you can actually match fund on pro rata £5 million a year if the government does the £5 million a year, which is £10 million a year. And three, we're able to find the £25 million over the course of the next 5 years. So I'm not sure that those hypotheticals, are actually realistic. What I'm happy to do is to go back and revisit the correspondence I've had with the government to see if we can get some support from them in relation to these particular areas. And I think you're right, though. The evidence is crystal clear. Retrofitting sprinklers will lead to these homes being far safer. So let me revisit this and see what we can do.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next question is from Assembly Member Russell, and it relates to protected cycle lanes.
Thank you, Chair. The safety of all road users is of paramount importance when it comes to the design and delivery of roads. It's worth reminding colleagues that TfL is responsible for just 5% of London roads, and the responsibility for managing London's road network is shared between TfL, Highways England, and the 32 London boroughs, plus the City of London. Since I became Mayor, we've delivered 10 kilometres of new segregated cycle superhighway and over 100 kilometres of new quiet ways. These have created a safe space for cyclists by reducing volumes of motor traffic on residential roads. I opened my first quiet way between Waterloo and Greenwich, and we're seeing huge growth on that route. I'm pleased quiet way 14, just over the road from City Hall, has seen a number of streets closed to cars to benefit local residents and cyclists alike. The Mini Holland, Quiet Ways and Central London Grid programmes are also delivering some segregated space too. By 2020, more than 30 kilometres of additional protected space will have been delivered through these three programmes. We're committed to making London's roads better and safer for all users, including cyclists, so people can feel confident in using our roads. I've committed a record average £169 million per year over the next 5 years via TfL's business plan towards improving cycling conditions in the capital. This is more than double the £79 million per year spent over the previous mayoral term. In addition to cycle lanes, we have a range of ways to provide protection to cyclists. More people have access to safe cycling by allocating separate lanes on busy main roads. We're reducing the speed and volume of traffic on other roads. We continue to use both approaches and make decisions on how we provide protection on a case-by-case basis. Design work is also progressing well on a major new segregated route in West London to replace the undeliverable plans for the Westway proposed in February 2016. Through 3 mini Hollands with Enfield, Waltham Forest and Kingston, we're putting in segregated cycle lanes. Data from these areas are showing strong cycling growth network, and also, of course, we have a livable neighbourhoods as well in 7 boroughs across London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reason I asked you this question again is because when I submitted it as a written question, I got a 313-word essay, but no number for the amount of stuff that have been built. So thank you for saying 10 kilometres. I think you'll actually find London Cycling Campaign, who are trying to be very generous to you, have actually said that you've built 14.3 kilometres, so it might even be a little bit better than that. But the point is that you have pledged to triple the amount of protected cycle lanes in your term, and the London Cycling Campaign have calculated that you are going to have to deliver on not only on everything that you've announced that you're planning to deliver, but you're also going to have to deliver on CS4, CS11 and CS9 if you're going to actually meet your promise of tripling the protected cycle lanes. Now, I just want to know, in January you announced 6 new cycling routes. When are we going to see a detailed schedule for their delivery?
So, firstly, I mean, you're right to remind me, actually, I do myself an injustice. We've done far more kilometres than Mini Hollands, Quiet Ways.
We're talking about protected cycle lanes. Quiet Ways and Mini Hollands are not protected cycle lanes.
And the Central London Grid as well. And so you're right to remind me that I should give myself more credit, Chair. In relation to CS11, are you also running?
Please don't use my time, please, I'm really short.
Mayor, In relation to CS11, Chair, I mean, the reason I made the point about we only are responsible for 5% of the roads is we need to work in consultation with councils. And CS11 is a good example where plans were given to us which didn't work. We reconsulted.
Mr. Mayor, I asked you about the 6 new cycling routes that you announced, the ones that you announced in January. When are we going to see a detailed schedule for their delivery?
Okay, well, I think you'd asked about segregated cycle lanes, but I'll move on to those. I mean, I can send you a letter that gives you the timeline and stuff, or I can read out the brief I've got here. But we've got to, so I can read them out. So we've got.
If you can send me a written answer about when you're going to have a schedule for the delivery of those 6 new routes, that would be great. On CS9, we know from Transport for London's consultation that 60% of people support that scheme. People in Brentford have been waiting for it since it was first proposed in 2010. It's really important because it's outer London, not inner London, and people in outer London really need to get on their bikes if you're going to deliver your clean air and everything else. So when will CS9 break ground?
This autumn with construction planned for 2019.
Sorry, with a construction plan for 2019, is that? That's useful. We'll look forward to seeing that actually on the ground. And so do you think that you are going to, or will you, meet your promise of tripling protected cycle lanes?
If the councils work with us, we can do it, but it doesn't help when councils like Westminster are taking us to court. And it's really important for people like you to also make sure you influence councils across London. There are 32 of them. We can't impose these cycle superhighways, segregated lanes. We need to work with them, and that means getting the public on our side. And it's a waste of taxpayers' money, in my view, to be bringing court cases stopping cycling lanes that we desperately need.
Completely agree with you about it being a waste of taxpayers' money, but also you have a role to make sure that the communities are on board and that they understand how these cycle lanes are going to help you to clean up the air.
Hold on a sec. We deliberately threw in the bin the previous plans because the previous mayor failed to do that, and we reconsulted, and the public in that communities were in favour, and local councillors will recognise the huge progress that was made by Wolf Norman speaking to residents. And actually Camden are in favour as well, and you've got a neighbouring borough bringing a judicial review. And, you know, I think genuinely this is an issue that shouldn't be party political. We've worked incredibly hard, Wolf Norman's worked incredibly hard bringing on board local residents. And it doesn't help when at the last minute councils bring these JRs. And we are trying to win over the public. It's really important we do so.
Okay,
I absolutely agree with you on
very
that,
much.
but these lanes do need to be built.
Thank you. On your bike. The next question is from Assembly Member Sahota and relates to a healthy workplace charter.
Thank you, Chair. The Healthy Workplace Charter is a great initiative, and I want to see it continue to be a success. Employers from a range of sectors across London have been supported in creating workplaces that improve the health and well-being of employees. As you'll be aware, findings from your Health Committee's research into workplace health published in February suggested that nearly 70% of employees working somewhere with the Workplace Charter think they have a sufficient health support at work, compared to just 31% of employees at jobs without the Charter. This demonstrates the positive impact the Charter has had on Londoners. You rightly suggest that just over 200 employers have been accredited. The vast majority of these have been since May 2016. However, this masks a few notable issues. The total number of organisations that we sign up to the Charter is more than triple this figure. There are 794 employers who are engaged with the Charter. The number of accredited organisations represent over 300,000 employees who are supporting to thrive in healthy working environments. Several employers have moved successfully through the Charter programme, gaining various levels of accreditation, showing that London employers are committed to the long-term investment in workplace health and ensuring it's sustainable. We're closely working with the remaining 582 employers to encourage and support their transition to accreditation. This is a huge potential with these employers to affect and improve the lives of thousands more Londoners. But I want to go faster and further in promoting the Charter. That's why we've developed an improved communication plan. It includes the creation of new promotional materials and telemarketing, including promoting the Charter within the low-paid sector. Whilst there may be many great qualities to the Charter, there's more that could be done to increase its effectiveness. And we'll continue to make an effort to reach small and medium-sized businesses. You'll be pleased to know we've commissioned a review and refresh of the Charter, which we expect to begin in July, with the aim of launching the refreshed Charter in October 2018.
Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for that response. And of course, this question which I have asked is based upon the work of the Health Committee. and which did recognise the tremendous benefit of the work charter. But what also has become transparent, that I have found great difficulty realising who's pushing this work. So can you tell me who's responsible for promoting and pushing this charter to the employers?
So the Deputy Mayor for Business, Rajesh Agrawal, is the Deputy Mayor in charge of this area, and so you'll be aware of the need to refresh this work. We'll take on board the recommendations you made, and with your permission, I'd like to consult with you to make sure we see what we can do to get even more employers taking this up, because it does need a refresh and a better comm strategy.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm grateful, and I know that the refresh will take place sometime in July, August, and we need to make it more accessible to these SMEs, and I'm grateful for the clarification that it sits with the business, Deputy for Business Skills. And also, is there any budget given to this promotion of this charter?
There is. I've not got that with me, but
if you write to me about what the process of pushing this forward, right? Okay, because I really want to make sure that this does get pushed, and also just to acknowledge that we've had a lot of interest from employers who are keen to take some board. Okay, and I think this sits very comfortably with your Thrive initiative, and also putting mental health as important as physical health. So if you would kindly if you write to me about this, it would be helpful. Okay, thank you.
The next question from Assemblymember Devonish is now down for written reply, Mr. Mayor. So can we please go on to Assemblymember Desai's question on the immigration status for criminals?
Thank you, Chair. I'm committed to putting the needs of victims of crime at the heart of everything the criminal justice system does. I've committed £47 million over 3 years to maintain, build and better integrate services for victims, an increase of £6 million compared to the previous mayoral term. I've also appointed the first Independent Victims Commissioner for London, Claire Waxman, who's working closely with MOPAC to improve the victims' experience in London. Of foremost importance to us is that all victims, regardless of their immigration status, feel able to come forward to report crime. I have and will continue to challenge any actions taken by partners that may deter victims from coming forward in future. There have been, as you suggest, a small number of incidents in London where a more effective partnership response was required. Lessons have been learned, and the Victims Commissioner for London is leading the way on this issue by convening a roundtable with Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden this summer on safe routes to reporting crime. This will be the second roundtable she's convened on this issue, and I look forward to supporting the Victims Commissioner to take forward the lessons coming from that roundtable. Regarding the immigration status of some victims, the police are required by law to share information they become aware of with the Home Office. The National Police Chiefs Council has provided some additional guidance to police forces explaining the extent of their discretion in carrying out an arrest in these circumstances. All victims of crime should feel able to come forward and report it. I've sought assurances that the Met Police Service will always seek to employ what discretion they have with the best interests of victims in mind, so that those affected have their needs as victims met as a top priority.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I heard much of what you said, but I think this is an area that needs clarity and with some urgency. So if you look at, say, for instance, the campaign against domestic modern slavery, which both this Assembly and you are committed to, on one hand, we want victims to come forward, but also on the other hand, the way that, say, the 6 months domestic workers visa scheme operates, it deters people from coming forward. And as I said, just as an example of the need for clarity, so the Met, as I understand it, said to The Guardian that PNC checks for victims of crime were conducted at the discretion of officers. Well, that clearly can't be right. We can't leave things to the discretion of individual officers. They need clear guidance. It's a difficult area. On one hand, you want all victims of crime to come forward. On the other hand, you obviously also want abuse of the immigration system to be tackled. You talked about the National Council, the National Police Chiefs Council, but again, as I understand it, the opposition is that they are, and I quote, considering whether further advice to police officers or to police forces is required. So in light of all this, would you consider, you said that clearer guidance needs to be given, but would you consider taking this matter up with the Home Office and to get clarity on this particular issue?
So first, thank you for raising...
And in terms of operational guidance to officers.
Yeah, thank you for raising this issue. I mean, just to remind colleagues, the reason why it's been raised is because of an example where somebody who was a victim of a very serious offence went to seek help as a victim, and it was reported to the immigration officials because of a breach of immigration rules. And the concern is others may be scared to come forward when they've been victims of very serious crimes because they're worried about the immigration authorities being informed. This is a national policy, and the police are required to act on this. What I want to do is to have the second round table with Claire Waxman meeting with relevant people, Home Office, groups, Deputy Mayor for South London, and then use that to write to the Home Secretary to make representations, because you're right, there's examples in the past of legislation where exceptions have been made to encourage victims to come forward, whether it's modern slavery or other abuse, and based upon the round table, the second round table, I'm very happy to write to the Home Secretary using the experiences we have from the round table to try and influence national policy.
Thank you.
We've dealt with Assemblymember Curtin's question, so we now go on to Assemblymember Hall and Economic Development Strategy.
Thank you, Chair. I published my draft Economic Development Strategy for consultation on the 13th of December 2017. The consultation closed on the 13th of March 2018. Since then, we've been reviewing the consultation responses and how the final strategy should respond to these. We've also been developing an implementation plan and indicator framework that will be used to monitor progress towards the strategy's ambitions. The final strategy will be published at the end of the year. I'll let you answer your question because otherwise we'll run out of time.
Oh, that's kind of you, thank you. Your draft economic development strategy calls for permissive powers to establish taxes such as tourism tax. So can you tell me what rate you're thinking of for this tax?
So very early stages. So we had a conversation with the Treasury, and the Treasury didn't close the door to this being an option. And the idea is, if you go to some cities on holiday, there's an optional tax you pay as a tourism tax, which is used to improve the facilities that encourages more tourists to come. So the concern is we don't want to get the hoteliers being off-site. These are early stage conversations we're having. We've not discussed rates. Unless there's an agreement that it's a way forward, the Treasury wouldn't do it anyway. But it's an example of us being able to raise more monies for London rather than going off to other parts of the country. And at this stage, it looks like it'd be an optional tax, but again, very early discussions.
Okay. I mean, you're very much for it. We had a meeting last week, you may have heard. The chairman of your commission, Night High Commission, Kate Nichols, is very much against this. What's the feeling when she's against it because businesses are against it?
And this is why I don't want to sort of, get the hairs running. These conversations at very early stage, and we've got to make sure people want it. There's no point having an optional tourism tax if everyone's against it and stuff. You will appreciate the importance to our economy of tourism. You'll appreciate that the pressure on hotels with Airbnbs and all the rest of it. So it's softly. The good news is the Treasury are encouraging us to have these conversations, and we want to work our way through the conversations to see if an agreement can be reached.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next question is from Assemblymember Sahota and relates to period poverty.
It's shocking that potentially 80,000 women and girls experienced this type of gender-based poverty in 2018 in London. The figure you referenced came from GLA research that I commissioned earlier this year. Period poverty is putting the health of these women and girls at risk and preventing them from fully engaging in their education, sports and community activities. Bless you. The shame and stigma that continue to surround periods compound this issue. With many girls admitting to not being able to afford the appropriate products they need, they're forced to resort to using inadequate protection or reluctantly asking for support from their school teachers and friends. On Menstrual Hygiene Day last month, as part of our Behind Every Great City campaign, and with the support of Free Periods campaigner Amika George and campaigner Gabby Edlin, I announced a collaboration with the Red Box Project. As a result, we now have 2 red boxes in City Hall that support a local secondary school in Southwark with the products they need. TfL will also be part of this collaboration with boxes in the TfL headquarters, and my officers are working to get local boroughs involved. On top of this, we're ensuring teachers have better information to help them talk about periods with students who might feel affected. This action won't solve period poverty, but will raise the profile of the issue and support local schools. Period poverty is also an issue in police custody, and MOPAC is working to ensure that women always have access to a female officer and a menstrual hygiene pack when required. Whilst I've carried out some initial research, there is an urgent need for in-depth government research on the scale of women and girls affected both in London and across the country, so that the right action can be taken to end period poverty. I've written to the Minister for Women and Equalities, Penny Mordaunt, to urge her to take action on this issue. Finally, I'll continue to call on the government to take urgent action and eradicate this poverty, which, though gender-based, is a manifestation of wider poverty and disadvantages those young girls and their families who are in this position.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that, and thank you very much for highlighting this as an issue, and I want to congratulate you for the work you did in Commission's research. You've already preempted a lot of the questions which I was going to ask in supplementaries, right, and I'm grateful that you we'll be working with other partners, particularly the education sector, and all the GLA other partners to raise this as an issue. So you undertake that, you're already doing that undertaking, yes?
Correct.
Great, thank you. And I know that you have already worked with Red Box, and you're working with other charities also to bring this to the attention of them. So I want to thank you for that, and I think I don't need to take any more of your time on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, in your research of period poverty in the capital, did you look at the pilot scheme run in Aberdeen, which has successfully provided sanitary products to more than 1,000 women on low incomes and is being rolled out across Scotland? Would there be a scope for a similar pilot in London?
Yeah, we have looked at the Scottish experience, and just to give a context, without wishing to be disparaging, I mean, Aberdeen's size is smaller than one of our boroughs. It's like 200,000 people in Aberdeen. And so we've got 32 boroughs that are bigger than Aberdeen. And so that gives you an idea of the scales. We have looked at what Aberdeen's done. One of the big concerns we have is the lack of in-depth research and anecdotal research. And so we are looking at what we can learn from Aberdeen, subject to the caveat London is obviously far vaster than Aberdeen.
Okay, thank you. And obviously that sort of calls the question that it might be worth doing it at a borough level as a pilot.
Well, the reason why it's important, Fiona, because it also, primary schools, we've got to get into primary schools as well. We've got to reduce the stigma. Everyone's talking about it, so it reduces the stigma and stuff as well. But you're right. And so what Aberdeen was useful for is primary schools, secondary schools, universities, community groups. And so those are good examples of ways into communities and stuff. And so you're right. We need to keep getting schools. Local authorities know the communities far better than we do in City Hall, and so that's why we don't want to reinvent the wheel. It's really important that we learn what we can from councils.
Thank you. And it's great to see the introduction of the Red Box scheme, and obviously it's advertised across City Hall at the moment. But what more could be done to help women experience period poverty that aren't in school? Because obviously it extends beyond that. Should places of work also be encouraged to stock free sanitary products?
I don't see why not. But also, can I just make this point, which is that I think the Assembly has got rich experience in knowing their communities, and so if there's ideas the Assembly has, we're always happy to hear. So, for example, we're going into custody suites. MOPEC are doing work there. The TfL estate is very important as well. But if there's ideas that you have, or others have, that we should be doing, I'm very happy to follow them up.
Great, thank you.
Assembly Member Dismore, key workers.
On the 5th of July this year, the NHS turns 70. Its workers play a vital role in supporting our city, but we know that high housing costs pose more of a barrier to recruiting and retaining these essential staff than ever before. 40% of nurses in London are now expecting to leave the capital by 2021 due to high housing costs, and many of the public sector workers are facing the same difficult decision. I'm clear we need to do more to support all Londoners to afford a home in the capital, including public sector workers. Alongside homes based on social rent levels and those for shared ownership, my Affordable Homes programme has introduced London Living Rent Homes, which have rents based on a third of local average household incomes and which can help renters save for a deposit to buy a home. Last year, a record number of GLA-funded affordable homes were started, alongside thousands of homes based on social rent levels. This included 6,688 homes for London Living Rent or shared ownership. Public sector land can make a valuable contribution to delivering the affordable homes that Londoners need. My Draft London plan clearly sets out that landowners should deliver a minimum of 50% affordable housing across the sites they bring forward. I'm working closely with public landowners, including NHS Trusts, through the London Estates Board, to identify surplus sites and deliver more affordable homes for Londoners. My London housing strategy makes clear my support for approaches that set aside a proportion of homes on land owned by government departments and agencies for key workers, such as health and educational professionals. I hope this approach may have a role in the redevelopment of St Hans Hospital in Haringey, 18 acres of which we've recently bought using money from the Land Fund. NHS workers, along with those working in the public sector, are critical to the future of our city.
Well, thank you for that. At the Royal Free Hospital on Monday, the Prime Minister announced a long-trailed increase in NHS spending. When she was at the Royal Free, do you think she was aware of the reports that the Royal Free NHS Trust are intending to redevelop Queen Mary's House, a century-old building, into 162 luxury flats, changing its current use as affordable homes for 52 nurses and teachers? The Royal Free have been marketing the site since March 2018. Thank you for your letter about this, which I received today, in which you say the Royal Free is gauging the level of interest with a view to a possible sale in the future. However, I think this has gone beyond that. A website's been set up to promote the building as Hampstead Garden, a rare opportunity to create one of the most desirable new build schemes in London. The key worker tenants are all on short-term leases, and while they're all free, Sadiq will find alternative accommodation for them. Ever higher property prices means it's harder for oil-free staff to live locally. To put it in context, it makes little sense to lose these homes for key workers when average monthly rent for a one-bed flat in Camden is £1,600, 78% of the average take-home pay for a nurse. I know from your letter you share my concerns about this. Do you think the loss of 52 affordable key worker homes and their replacement with 162 luxury flats complies with the London plan and your policies?
No. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, and we are now talking to the Trust. Our policies are quite clear. The loss of staff accommodation only accepted if it's properly re-provided. Public surplus land, at least half, should be genuinely affordable homes. Because it looks like the Trust has ambitions of more than 150 homes, it will come to us as the GLA Strategic Authority. But I'm hoping the conversations we have with the Trust will bear fruit. But again, as ever, thank you for bringing this to our attention, and we'll make sure we follow this up.
Well, thank you for that. Do you think this contrasts with your approach, for example, bringing the previously abandoned cottages at behind West Hampstead Fire Station back into use for key workers in the LFB?
Well, actually, I mean, again, thank you. When you were on LFIPA, the work you did to bring this to our attention was really important. You'll be aware that actually this is an example where surplus fire station estate would have just been sold off to the highest bidder, lost forever. As a consequence of representations you made, and the Deputy Mayor is well across this, the good news, which you should be proud of, bearing in mind your involvement, is working closely with the London Fire Brigade on the West Hampstead estate. Those derelict cottages will be refurbished and made available to 8 single-person homes for service workers. And it's a good example of us using surplus public estate for the benefit of key public sector workers. And Andrew, you should be really proud of that, your role you played in that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is out of time, so we go to exclusion zones in the name of Assembly Member Twycross.
I welcome the result of the referendum in Ireland. This is a progressive step towards achieving long overdue equality for Irish women. My position on the matter of protests outside abortion clinics is clear. We must protect women that suffer harassment and abuse when exercising their legal rights. This is the kind of protection I've sought for women through my Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. On the whole, women can be confident that they are able to access health services free from intimidation. However, there are areas where this is not the case, as constant protests and graphic images are used to cause deep upset and trauma for many women using reproductive health services, as well as people living near the clinics. I've raised this issue with the Commissioner of the Met Police. There are limits on the extent of the role of the police can play in tackling this issue. As a result, in response to the Home Office's Domestic Abuse Bill consultation, we've called on the government to consider changes to the law to more directly protect women's rights to access pregnancy-related medical services free from intimidation and duress. Ealing is one area that has experienced significant issues. As a result, their cabinet recently took the decision to implement a public spaces protection orders. This is intended to help ensure that women can approach abortion services without having to come into contact with the protesters. If this is infringed upon, this will constitute a civil disorder and the local authority or police will be able to deal with it appropriately. Although I should note that this PSPO has not come into effect yet, as it's been challenged in the High Court. We expect the ruling soon. Nevertheless, I am clear in my backing of the action by Ealing. While I respect, Chair, the right for peaceful protest, behaviour that deliberately targets women for harassment and intimidation cannot be tolerated. So I commend councils for taking decisive action and note Lambeth Council are also looking at taking similar steps. Where appropriate, I encourage other councils to consider what actions they can take to prevent harassment.
Thank you. I welcome your support for women's rights in this area and for the action being taken by Ealing and potentially Lambeth. Clearly, the point at which the protection zones, the exclusion zones, are implemented, local authorities may actually require some support from the MPS if a breach takes place. Will you therefore be ensuring that MOPAC issues guidance to borough commanders on this point?
I mean, I've looked, the Deputy Mayor, Sophie Linden, and I have raised this with the police. And the problem at the moment is the police haven't got powers to stop lawful protest outside clinics which is why the PSPO was a useful device that Ealing passed. That's been challenged in the courts. And so once the court case is finished, and let's see what happens with the court case, let's see what happens with Lambeth, I think those two are good examples where there are additional things that can be done for breach of the PSPO. And that's one of the reasons why we've responded to the consultation, which I'm happy to share with you, in relation to more things the government could be doing, additional powers which will give the police more tools they can use in those circumstances where people are harassing women utilising their rights to visit these clinics.
Well, greater clarity would be very useful in terms of making sure that people were no longer able to suggest that they were having peaceful protests when it is genuine harassment. I think some of the stories are quite disturbing about the abuse that women and workers have had to face going in and out of the clinics. What kind of noises have you had back from government about the changes that you've asked for?
We've not heard back yet from the Home Office. I suspect a number of people, including the Home Office, are watching the judicial review in relation to the Ealing case. I suspect, by the way, some local authorities are waiting to see what happens with that case as well. There may be other councils, I mentioned Lambeth because it's the public domain. There may be other councils who are considering what actions they can take to protect women in particular who are using the clinics. The advantage of that is it gives the police and local authorities an additional power. The concern is at the moment there are no additional powers because, you know, as we would see it as intimidation and harassment. There is the other argument, this is lawful protest, and that's why additional powers via PSPO is really helpful. The Home Office, I suspect, are watching what happens with the judicial review, and then we'll consider what response to take. But we have responded to them, and we'll carry on engaging with them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question has fallen because it's out of time. Can we go, please, to cleaner walking routes to school from Assemblymember Gavron?
Thank you, Chair. We live in a city where air is so lethal it leads to thousands of premature deaths every year, and some London children are growing up with underdeveloped lungs. This is the reason I've been doing everything in my power to protect the health of Londoners from toxic air. We've now delivered air quality audits at 50 primary schools located in the worst polluted areas in London. The audits have assessed indoor and outdoor air pollution and made recommendations that can help protect students from exposure to poor air quality. Proposed measures range from pedestrianisation around school entrances and exits to improving indoor ventilation, creating more green space and encouraging walking and cycling. I want every school that needs an audit to have one. We've developed a toolkit to enable boroughs to deliver audits at other schools. I've also announced a total of £1.05 million in additional funding. This includes £10,000 to each of the 50 audited schools as they work with the local borough on implementing wider recommendations. We're asking boroughs to match this. Any school located in a polluted area will be able to apply for greening funding through my Greener City Fund. There will also be £250,000 for a new nursery audit programme which will trial indoor air filters. This is not the only funding we've made available. In 2018-19, a total of £237 million has been budgeted to help boroughs manage their streets, and in 1920, £229 million has been budgeted. Boroughs will be encouraged to use some of this funding to implement the audit recommendations of schools, as well as fund new audits for other affected schools.
Thank you. It's Clean Air Day, and I really want to congratulate you for the work you're doing on improving air quality around schools all across the city. And I think this, you mentioned the toolkit, it's very good, I've read it, and it's very comprehensive, and I think it will enable many schools in areas with high pollution to actually start developing action plans. But there's some schools that won't have the resources to be able to do it. And I wondered, you've said a lot about what boroughs can do, but is there more that boroughs can do to incentivise schools to work with their communities?
Well, the good news is that boroughs now have huge sums of money at their disposal. The people pressure from pupils, governors, teachers, parents is putting pressure on councils to invest that in green schools. But I've seen examples of some boroughs and schools leveraging in the private sector. So one school I visited in Westminster, you had a local business supporting financially a greening of a wall, which doesn't cost that much in terms of the profit and loss sheet, but makes a big difference to a school. In that school, they were turning a staff car park into a garden area with pots and plants and a greening wall. A lot of this stuff doesn't cost much money. in relation to the changes that can be made. Putting up notices outside of schools saying, don't leave your engine idling, and other things like that. So that's why the toolkit hopefully will provide useful ideas for schools that aren't necessarily that expensive. But you're right, those schools with the worst air are in the most deprived parts of London with the most difficult budgets, and parents who can't afford to subsidise this sort of stuff, which is why we need to be innovative. And I'm hoping councils work with schools to improve the air around schools.
Right. It's very bold, I think, of you as mayor to actually commission specialists, technical specialists, to look at the issue of indoor air quality. And what you've done, I think, I've read the report, and what's been done is to expose the hidden harm to children from being in classrooms where polluted air is trapped. And it's very good you're doing the filtration pilot in nursery schools. But I wondered whether, because there are profound implications from reading this report, to buildings, old and new school buildings, and their maintenance and their location, I just wondered whether this might be something that you could include when you lobby government for a Clean Air Act.
So there's good news on that. You see, yesterday when Michael Gove attended the summit, and again I want to commend him for coming to the summit and listening to the points made by colleagues around the table, there was a representative from the Royal College of Physicians present as well who made the point about indoor poor quality air. Most of it comes from outdoor. But Michael Gove got the point that actually a new Clean Air Act could address some of the issues around cleaning materials and other issues that exist inside inside the buildings. So the good news is the point you're making is a point that we've been making, but it appears that Deferred appeared to be listening as well. But what we intend to do as a consequence of yesterday's summit is the various leaders across the country, England and Wales, to make a joint submission to the government in relation to what we'd want to see in a new Clean Air Bill/Act, but also separately, Nikki, make a joint submission about what we'd want to see in a CSR, but also in this autumn's budget as well. And we're hoping that Michael Gove is our advocate inside the Cabinet when it comes to lobbying the Treasury, MHCLG, DFT, DFE in relation to some of the issues that we've talked about.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would the Assembly please agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Thank you very much. And we now go to the penultimate question, which is from Assembly Member Eshalomi and relates to rail devolution.
Thank you, Chair. Following the changes to Govia Thameslink Railway timetables on 20th of May, commuters have suffered severe disruption and cancellations across the network. I know the relevant officer will be coming to the Transport Committee next week. In some instances, trains have reportedly disappeared from timetables altogether. These changes were billed as a serious improvement in services, but instead they've resulted in chaos, impacting terribly on passengers both in and outside London. Passengers have faced years of terrible service and suburban rail services, but the last month has been utter chaos. With no clear plan in place to fix the situation, it's only right the Chief Executive of Govia Thameslink has stood down. I wrote to him over a fortnight ago calling for urgent action, but nothing has yet been done, and I haven't yet had the courtesy of a response. Commuters are continuing to face cancellations, delays and severe disruption on a daily basis. I've raised my concerns directly with the Secretary of State for Transport and told him that if he strips GTR of their contract, he would have my support. The inquiry into what caused this chain of events is a vital piece of work. I'm not going to go over the disagreement I've had with the Secretary of State about the failure to honour the agreement to devolve Southern, South Eastern and South Western to TfL, but I do welcome the offer made by him last year in his strategic vision for rail that suggests TfL should run services on the Moorgate branch and additional services on the West London branch. TfL would also like to improve services from Victoria and London Bridge to create a London suburban metro, relieving congestion and offering improved frequencies, journey times and interchange opportunities. The DfT will soon start a remapping exercise for the Thameslink Southern Great Northern franchise, and I've instructed TfL to work with them in this exercise to ensure the right long-term solutions for London and the South East occur.
Thank you for that, Mr Mayor, and I think we all definitely agree that Charles Horton's resignation was very much welcomed. Again, I won't go over some of the disruptions that residents have had across both Lambeth and Sadiq, but London-wide and further out in the South East. But do you agree that instead of setting up an inquiry, which the Minister for Rail announced, Joe Johnson, actually the only inquiry they should have is how they're going to devolve that service down to TfL?
I agree. I mean, I think Chris Grellan and I have had our run-ins and disagreements, But it kind of escaped his attention that services, when they're run nearer to those who receive the services, must be better than services run from command and control from Whitehall. And the way that the DFT, Nomek Rail, Govia have behaved in the last few weeks and months makes the case far better than I could ever do why devolution is the smart thing to do. We will still carry on working with the government to try and progress the stuff they've offered, but really the objective must be devolving the commuter trains to TfL.
That's good. On that, discussions with the government on some of the stuff that they've indicated some support. So you'll know that the GIB report highlighted looking at the Great Northern Metro and the East Croydon to meet Milton Keynes operation as well, maybe later on this year. Have you had any additional discussions with them on that?
So whenever the Secretary and I meet, we discuss this issue. This is behind, we're not going as fast as I'd like. TfL have regularly contacted the DFT to get things moving, and will continue to do so. There are timelines in play in relation to when the next franchise occurs, and we're keen to make sure that those lines that the GIB talked about we progress, whilst trying to also have discussions about the other stuff to be devolved as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member McCartney.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask you about the Great Northern franchise, and it's something I've raised with you before because it runs through my constituency of Enfield and Haringey, and even before the timetable fiasco, I was having regular complaints about cancelled and delayed trains, and it's a line I use every day to get into work. So I was very heartened last year when the GIB report said that devolution to TfL should happen immediately, so I'm disappointed that they have not yet made that decision. But can I ask you, because in the statement to Parliament, Chris Grayling, Secretary of State, says that he is talking to TfL, but also he says there's a business case for putting the Great Northern Line in with a new franchise with LNER, who has just been announced as a new operator for the failing East Coast Line. That seems to me repeating the mistakes of the past when this line was put with Thameslink and was criticised then for being too big. Would you agree with that?
I agree, but also don't forget, once a new contract's been given, it means for X years we can't touch it without having to pay compensation. So my understanding from DFT was that the remapping of the Thameslink Southern and Great Northern will begin later on this year. And you're right, this is a crucial piece of work to see how the franchise can be separated out and improved for your commuters and Londoners. And it's really important that the government follows those recommendations. We will, as a consequence of your question, I'll speak to TfL and chase up what progress has been made, because what would be unacceptable is if inadvertently this is included in a package for a franchise that's signed off for the next 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've written to Chris Grayling again earlier this month, urging him to do that. But the franchise is due to be handed over to, I presume, a new operator in 2021. And when you talk to TfL, it would be good if we could ask them if they could bring that forward, because my residents are really fed up with the delays.
Chair, if I could take both those issues up offline and speak to TfL about action in those.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Copley, free advertising on the underground.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure that no newspaper would want to compromise editorial integrity in this way. My understanding is that the Evening Standard has denied allegations that it has accepted money in exchange for favourable news coverage. TfL has commercial agreements with both the Evening Standard and the Metro, which gives both papers the right to distribute on TfL land, including the Tube, Overground, buses, TfL Rail and Docklands Light Railway. The contract between TfL and the Evening Standard grants exclusive distribution rights at 242 locations across London between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. This contract runs until September 2020, providing a stable revenue stream that is reinvested in the transport network.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. Well, as your opponent in the previous mayoral election found out, wall-to-wall favourable coverage in the Standard isn't always effective anyway. But there is, I think, a serious point here, which is about the blurring of some of the lines within the press. I mean, we've seen it with news and editorial for many years, and now there's a danger that we're seeing the merging of editorial and advertising. I've not actually watched this, but apparently there's a new Channel 4 show which is sponsored by Uber, which involves people going around and talking to Uber drivers. Do you think that there's a risk that the waters could be muddied even further and people could become unable to distinguish between paid-for news and commercial content?
Speaking in general terms, because I think we have to, because of the denial by the standard, so speaking in general terms, it's a big source of concern about people receiving news which they think is news, but it's not really news. It's an indirect way of advertising a product or a point of view, and that's why it's really important that there are rules in place. So there is a committee of advertising practice. They have media advertising rules, and what is clear as the reader that we're able to distinguish easily what is something that's paid for and something that is independent news. And any blurring of those waters would be regrettable. One of the things I love about, we should all love about living in a country like ours, in a city like ours, is the freedom of the press. We as politicians can't tell them what to write, nor should we have people influencing what they write by indirectly paying for it. And so I'm sure that the Standard, like others, would abide by the advertising standard codes.
And do you think the Advertising Standards Agency guidance on advertorials is adequate, or do you think perhaps it needs to be reviewed in light particularly of new forms of media?
I think you've got to always have regulation evolving to keep abreast of developments in technology and innovative ways that people might use to try and influence the media. I'm always nervous as a politician lecturing the free press about what more they need to do to sort their house out, because it looks like I'm self-serving. And so it's really important the press understands the appetite from the public interest in being free, in them making it quite clear what is paid for advertising, what is an advertising feature, and what is independent news written by professional journalists as well. And just to remind colleagues, obviously, rules in relation to broadcast are different to rules in relation to non-broadcast as well.
And just to be clear for Londoners on the allegations, the accusations that were made about the Evening Standard, are you satisfied from what you've heard from the Evening Standard that we aren't going to see paid for news articles where Londoners aren't aware that what they're reading is being paid for by a private company?
Well, I'm still looking forward to the Standard writing nice things about me.
Don't hold your breath.
I'm not going to hold my breath.
I'm looking forward to all the nice things they're going to say about me for asking this question.
Yeah. I'm not holding my breath, though. But I think, look, I accept the denial of allegations made by the Standard. I think we should take the denial of the allegations in the spirit in which it is said. I know the allegations made in the other direction and stuff, and the reality is, allegations were made, they've denied them. We should take them in the spirit in which they were said. On the face of it, it seems acceptable. But, the general point that you're advocating is one that nobody would disagree with, even those who may be critics of our politics, which is that actually a free press must mean what it says on the tin, which is a free press.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. We recall, Mr. Mayor, that earlier in the meeting we discussed the effect of stepping up the war against the third runway would stiffen the sinews of members of Parliament. Members of the Assembly will no doubt be pleased to know that Greg Hands has resigned from the government so he can vote against the third runway.
What
so
about
it's
Boris?
Already had an effect. Anyway, thank you very much.
Chair, sorry, are you giving that scalp to me?
We'll share it. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your answers. Thank you so much. Can I ask the Assembly, please, to agree the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to questions asked?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the Assembly to agree that the 15th of November 2018 London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting be rescheduled to 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 22nd of November 2018, and that the 13th of December 2018 London Assembly Mayor's Question Time be rescheduled to Thursday, the 20th of December 2018 at 10 o'clock.
Agreed.
Thank you. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 5th of July 2018, here at City Hall. The meeting will principally be used to hold a question and answer session with the Chair and Interim Chief Executive Officer of the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. There has been no urgent business. Thank you.
GLA, Chamber, Sound.